Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1964 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Julie Andrews won for her performance in Mary Poppins. But why did she beat fellow nominees Anne Bancroft, Sophia Loren, Debbie Reynolds, and Kim Stanley? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 37th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1964. We will be discussing why Julie Andrews won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is a theater aficionado, writer, cat lover, as he says in his Twitter description, Tony Awards researcher, great Twitter presence, expert on all things musical, I would add in, so perfect for this episode. This is his first time on the show. Please welcome Kevin Daly.
Hi, Kev.
Hey, we have a fellow Kevin here. I hope this isn't too confusing for the listeners. But yeah, really excited to have you on.
I am ready. I cannot wait.
Well, before we talk about 1964, let's talk Best Actress as a category. My first question for you, Kevin, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
My favorite. I gave this a lot of thought. The obvious answer came to me like almost right away. So I'm just going to give one runner-up, which is Marie Dressler for Min and Bill, because I just love her. She's so much fun to watch, but also that this character actress in her 60s was the biggest movie star in Hollywood for a short period of time. That's a wonderful thing, and I feel like we should have more of that now. But my all-time favorite is Emma Thompson in Howard's End.
Wow.
It is one of my go-to comfort movies, if that makes any sense. It's something I found as a teenager. It was on like Bravo when it used to be like classic arts and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was mesmerized by her and by Anthony Hopkins. And the more I delved into it, the more I was just sort of so taken by her and the character of Margaret Schlegel and everything that the film was trying to say. But her performance specifically really grabbed me because it's not very showy. She's sort of like a constant throughout. Mm-hmm. And she has to react to a lot of drama around her and absorb it. And she's such an anchor and such a center. But when she does let go, it is so grounded and so honest and so devastating. And it just thrills me. Yeah. And that she won. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of like her big, like she'd been doing stuff, but that Oscar really catapulted her to the next level. So lucky us.
Indeed, yes. And we've been loving Emma Thompson ever since. She's just coming off a really excellent year, as we know, with Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, and Matilda the Musical also. So yeah, I love her. I love Marie Dressler. I think both of those examples actually are good examples of, you know, actors really bringing something of themselves to those roles, and in a way that, you know, if another actor was in that role, they might not be an Oscar winner for that performance.
Well, so. I think about with Emma Thompson that I went to the 25th anniversary screening back it was at the Paris Theater, and James Ivory, the director, was there, and he talked about how they didn't have a script available when they met. So she just read passages of the novel to him. And he was like, I'm sold.
Yeah, I believe it.
It's just extraordinary. But yeah, I love a character actress. And both of them are great character actresses. Mm-hmm. And really going to get into that with Mary Poppins.
Oh yes,
because
very, very
every
true.
character actress is supporting Julie
Every
Andrews there.
single character actress. I forgot truly how this is a murderer's row, which we'll get
True.
to. Well, my other question for you, we love our winners, but we also love some of the heartbreak of an Oscar loss in Best Actress. So, what is your most heartbreaking loss in this category?
My heartbreaking loss. Well, the easy answer is Judy Garland and A Star is Born. But I'm not going to go with that for this conversation today because I feel like that's so many people's first obvious choice. I
Yeah.
mean, it was Groucho Marx's first choice. But I am going to choose Irene Dunn, who should have at least one of Louise Reiner's Oscars. Specifically, I think she should have won for Theodora Goes Wild
Ooh.
back in 1936.
Mm-hmm.
She lost. Louise won for The Phone Call in The Great Ziegfeld, and Louise Reiner was, wonderful and glamorous and actressy. But it really is something of a supporting performance to me
Yeah.
because at a certain
100%.
point she's out of the film and Myrna Loy is there as Billie Burke,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a long movie and she's there for such a short period. I guess it was why they were like, we need a supporting category because that's what happened the next year.
Mm-hmm.
But watching Irene Dunn in Theodora Goes Wild, it was her first time doing comedy on film. And she's spectacular. She is so wonderful to watch. And just sort of, it opened this whole avenue for her of doing film comedy, being in Screwballs. I mean, the next year, her next nomination was for The Awful Truth, which is a better film overall. But Cary Grant beats Melvin Douglas easily. But just everything she had done, I'm like, oh, if there was like one of the roles where it should have been hers, and I feel she should have won an Oscar.
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel it should have been that first for Theodore Goes Wild, that comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I fall on that.
That's very good. I've always been split on that 36 year because we also have a great screwball performance in that category as well with Carol Lombard in My
Yep.
Man Godfrey. So it's tough, but yes, she had 5 nominations, never won. One of the classic Oscar bridesmaids, and yeah,
And
that
I
would have been a good
love an
opportunity.
Oscar bridesmaid.
Yes,
And I every year on Oscar night I tweet that Deborah Carr was robbed.
and you should say that.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're right to say that. I completely agree, as I'm sure you know, having listened to the show. Big fan of Deborah Carr, so she should have like 3 or 4 more nominations. She should have like 10 nominations, as far as I'm concerned. But,
She should have walked away with it all, but that's
mm-hmm,
not what they felt at the time.
no,
Voters are
they did
very
not.
fickle.
Yes, they are. They are a
They
fickle bitch,
loved the
as they
Great
say.
Ziegfeld.
Yes. Well, that's a really, really cool choice. I love that. And I'm really excited to jump into this year that we're going to talk about here with a lot of fabulous and very diverse performances. Maybe not in, they're all white, but diverse in the types of performances they're giving, as we know. So let's talk about it. The 37th Academy Awards, the nominees were Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins, Anne Bancroft in The Pumpkin Eater, Sophia Loren in Marriage Italian Style, Debbie Reynolds in The Unsinkable Molly Brown, and Kim Stanley in Seance on a Wet Afternoon. With the winner being, of course, who else but Julie Andrews. So before we break down these performances, would love to know if you had any overall thoughts just from sort of binging all of these at once over the past week.
What startled me is that I had never seen Seance on a Wet Afternoon, nor had I seen Marriage Italian Style before. So those were new to me, and I was surprised at just how much I enjoyed them and how great. I shouldn't be surprised. They're two of, the most noted actresses of the 20th century, but that Kim Stanley, who made very few film appearances, and Sophia, who was really one of the finest actresses we've ever had on film, I think. Like, you look at what she did in the 1960s, including in this film, and it's extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a fascinating lineup. I feel like Kim Stanley got in as part of the My Fair Lady conversation. That's what my hunch is. But just, it's very hard, I think, to pick one that would be considered best out of the 4 of 5 nominees. I'm apologies to Debbie Reynolds. I love her to death. I think she's wonderful, and she's been wonderful in other films. This just does. The Unsinkable Molly Brown just does not really do it for me. And we've seen her in Singing in the Rain and The Catered Affair. She can do a lot of different stuff on screen, but of the other 4 women, though, they are all giving remarkable film performances that are worthy of nomination and even of a win. If any of those four had won, you could be like, okay, I
Mhm.
get it. And
Yeah,
that was my takeaway.
I completely agree. A really, really fun year, a fun lineup to watch. A big rebound from 1963 for me. You haven't heard that episode, but a little mixed on that one, to put it
I
lightly.
feel that there's a little category fraud going on in '63.
Yeah,
I feel
pretty strong.
Patricia Neal
Yeah.
should have won supporting and Leslie Caron should have won lead. That's my feeling there.
Well,
But
you will
anyway,
hear my feelings on that episode. But what I love is that all of these films, all these performances are doing such different things. As we said, I mean, you've got
mhm.
heavy drama, thriller, musicals, a dash of romantic comedy, family film, British New Wave, Italian. It's like there's a little something for everyone.
It
And
really is.
we've got three new nominees, which I always like, plus two previous winners who had won very recently. So it's a nice blend there. Exciting for me personally to finally get some more musical performances for the first time since I think Deborah Carr in The King and I. So it's been like 8 years.
It's interesting that there are not a lot of musical comedy or just musical performances in general don't have a lot of showing in the Best Actress category.
Yeah.
I think Julie is the first winner for a musical.
Yeah,
I mean,
unless you kind of count Louise Reiner, even though,
she sings
that's
like two
gray area.
minutes, but like
Right.
for like a full solid
Yeah.
musical comedy performance,
Yeah.
it's Julie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do think what's fascinating about this is that this is one of those Oscar races where the more interesting story is what's not here. You know,
Yes.
Audrey Hepburn not being nominated, despite My Fair Lady winning Best Picture, getting all those nominations, and then the ultimate Best Actress winner, Julie Andrews, being passed over for the film version. It creates this kind of duality.
It's sort of it dominates the conversation of the year,
Yeah,
I
you
think,
can't
because
ignore it. Yeah.
you can't. I mean, and it's not fair to either Julie Andrews or Audrey Hepburn that
Right.
they're pitted that way. It's just sort
Mm-hmm.
of what Jack Warner decided.
Yeah.
And then
Pretty
that
much.
because as I understand it, Julie and Audrey were actually became very friendly
Yeah.
because of the connection with Blake
There
Edwards.
was no animosity. Yeah.
There was no animosity. They were very
Mm-hmm.
gracious, very kind to each other, but it's sort of the perfect storm of an Oscar narrative. I
It
mean,
really is.
it goes back to like when Julie was in Camelot, that's 61, 62. That's when Walt Disney was like, "Hey, do you want to be my Mary Poppins? Because I think you're great." And she's like, "Well, I want to see what happens with My Fair Lady first, but also I'm pregnant, so can we wait?" And he was like, and that's what he was like. He's like, "We'll put everything on hold." And he's like, turn, and then he turned to her husband, Tony Walton, was like, "What do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, I design sets." And he's like, "Bring your portfolio." And then there he is designing Mary Poppins, the movie.
Right.
But everything, it's just a confluence of so many specific things happen that lead to her winning Best
Mm-hmm.
Actress for Mary Poppins. And also, the other thing about, since you brought it up now,
Mm-hmm.
the other thing about this week that I've noticed is that the more I look into 1964 as a year in cinema, I don't like the word snub, but the more it feels like it was an intentional
Mm-hmm.
dismissal of
Oh
Hepburn's
yeah.
performance because she got the Golden Globe nomination, but that was about it for awards love for her.
Mm-hmm.
And even when it was released in England the year after, she didn't get a BAFTA nomination for it. It struck me. It struck me like, oh, because it's the second highest grossing film of the year. It is a prestige project. It got good reviews and it was a huge hit.
Yeah, and she got
And
good reviews too,
and
generally.
she's really good in it. That's the
Yeah.
other part of it.
Yeah.
It's the narrative about the dubbing being a half performance. It just Jack Warner created a headache for himself in a
Right.
sense because I mean obviously you're not gonna pick the unknown from Broadway when you can get a movie star,
Mm-hmm.
but he had no idea that the person he passed over was going to make her film debut carrying a hugely successful, just monumental motion picture the same year, which also happens to be a musical, which also happens to be set in London at the same time. So there's a similar aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
soprano roles, and Mary Poppins just ended up being this huge juggernaut success.
Yeah.
It was the highest grossing Disney film up to that point
Yeah.
or
Oh yeah.
something. It's
Mm-hmm.
just so
It's
it's
wild.
a wild conversation,
Yeah.
and poor Audrey. She didn't deserve that. And I
She
mean,
didn't.
well, I've read have you seen the letters from Deborah Carr and Katharine Hepburn to her?
Yeah, I saw the Katharine
It's
Hepburn one. That was funny.
uh, it's really interesting that
Hmm.
that's these other stars were like, Audrey, you didn't deserve this.
Yes, they rallied behind her.
They
Yes.
did, and
Yeah.
and I feel for Julie because she also felt in a way that it was like the consolation prize for
Yeah.
not getting My Fair Lady.
Yeah.
But that it's just sort of how life happens. It's like
Hmm.
you may want something, but you don't always get that. You get something else instead. And
Right.
for Julie, she ended up in the 2 consecutive years she was in the highest grossing film. Like
Yeah.
that,
On
like
top of the world. Yeah.
it's just remarkable and it's fascinating, and it will always be fascinating
Yeah.
because you will go back and watch My Fair Lady, which you can argue whether or not it deserved Best Picture over Mary. I mean, that's the thing. It's like two of the Best Picture nominees are Edwardian musicals.
When
Like,
do you get that?
yeah, the top two grossing films of the year are musicals, and they're both critically acclaimed. And you can't really say they're similar, but there's just a lot of coincidental vibes in common.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of that is really, weighing over this Best Actress race. So it's, again, impossible not to talk about it, even if we're
And then
not going to talk too
I
much
mean,
about
and then
Audrey.
The Academy loves a messy drama.
They do.
And so they were like, hey, Audrey, come present Best Actor.
Yes.
And being the gracious, lovely woman she was, she showed up and was lovely and gracious and kind and
Yeah.
presented it to Rex Harrison
How about that?
for My Fair Lady. And there's Rex posing backstage with Julie Andrews. Just
Yeah.
and then Audrey and Julie were photographed together. And I was just looking at Julie's memoir last night
Mm.
to refresh myself about her experiences on Oscar night. And A, she thought Anne Bancroft was going to win, and B, she said that Audrey came up to her and said, "You should have done it, but I couldn't say no," which
It's just fair.
I get.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a fascinating story. It reminds me of like Driving Miss Daisy and Do the Right Thing in that respect, where it feels like they're dealing in similar territory, but one is snubbed and one is winning. So
Hmm.
it's really just fascinating. Let's break down these nominees. I'm really excited to talk about everyone else who is nominated in this category as well, because I do feel that they all deserve their proper due. So let's start off with our first losing nominee, Anne Bancroft in The Pumpkin Eater. One of two very recent Best Actress winners that we'll talk about today, now returning for their second nominations. And for Anne Bancroft, this is a film that she does directly after The Miracle Worker, so she's really in the prime of her career at the moment, and the industry's really taking notice with her talents and everything. So she'll obviously get another nomination a few years down the line for The Graduate. So it's a great time to be Anne Bancroft right now. And this is a very juicy, complicated role that she really threw herself into. The Pumpkin Eater is about a housewife named Jo, played by Anne Bancroft, who has 5 children from previous marriages, and even more now in her third marriage to Jake, played by Peter Finch. She finds herself kind of unsatisfied with her life, but can't seem to put her finger on what it is that she's, that's making her so unhappy. But quite a bit of it stems from her husband, who is unfaithful, often is cheating on her, and she's coming to realize that she finds fulfillment in having children. But once the sort of miracle of childbirth is over, she feels pretty empty and isolated, sometimes even from her own family. So that's the gist of the film. I'd say it's more character study than super plot heavy. But let's get right into it. Thoughts on the great Anne Bancroft as an actress first, and then her performance here in The Pumpkin Eater.
She's really remarkable, even in lesser movies. Like if you see some of the films that didn't do so well critically in her career, like Garbo Talks, which is one of my favorites of hers, she is so committed. She's so honest. She's so compelling to watch. That was something while revisiting The Pumpkin Eater. Like there were times when she turned and the camera caught her, and I'm just like, my God, because she's so beautiful. She's so riveting, and I just love spending time with her whenever she's on screen. I mean, The Miracle Worker is probably her best known film performance, would you say?
I would say The Graduate at this
Graduate,
point, but
that's fair. That's
yeah.
fair. My thing about The Graduate is it's like category fraud, but she's a
Yeah.
star. But
We'll get to that on that episode, I'm sure.
oh, I'm sure.
Hmm.
She did so many interesting roles, and tried so many different things. It was never just like, okay. Just the fact that she's going from The Miracle Worker, where she played Annie Sullivan, to playing a British woman
Yeah,
going through a truly depressive time in her life.
it's bleak.
And
Yeah.
it's a very it's not a happy film. The Pumpkin Eater, we get into some really serious stuff with her mental health, with abortion and reproduction, and also her femininity versus all the patriarchy around her.
Hmm.
Because at some point, near the end of the film, if she had picked up a gun and shot every man inside, I would have been like, I get it.
Good for her.
That was sort of where I was the first time I saw The Pumpkin Eater. I'm like, these men are awful.
Hmm.
But she is so internalized. It's maybe one of her most internalized performances, because there's
Yeah.
so much where she's observing and absorbing what's going on around her.
Hmm.
But what's also going around her is very upsetting at times. It is a very bizarre movie. The script is very strange. You kind of zig when you expect to zag. And I imagine a lot of that is Harold Pinter's screenplay. I mean, with a few tweaks. I mean, it's, Jack Clayton directed it. It's like halfway between Room at the Top and The Innocents, because with a few
Yeah.
tweaks, this is a horror movie.
Feels like it at times. Yeah.
Because there are so many unsettling sequences, like the one with Eutha Joyce in the beauty parlor,
Oh my God.
which is it is one of the most terrifying scenes in any movie.
It is.
But she's just so indelible, and I can't imagine what that must have done, because she's a serious actor studio actress, all that kind of stuff, and the journey that the film goes on it just gets bleaker and bleaker.
Hmm. Probably
I,
the most
I
difficult film to sit through of the five here.
Yeah, it starts off okay, and then it just gets more miserable.
Yeah.
And Peter Finch is so awful to her.
And he's very good at being awful, just as an
He
actor.
is remarkably good at being awful.
Yes.
And
So,
and I love that she has two nominated performances where she has a climactic fight scene.
yeah.
This and The Turning Point. But
Hmm.
when she
That's
unloads
true.
on him, she just pummels him. I'm like, you go.
The smash cut to that is really fun. I love that.
It is well, because it comes off of yet another like unsettling set piece, because all
Yeah.
of these little bit parts, the king of Israel, is that what he
Yeah.
calls himself?
Hmm.
He walks in the house and he's just telling her she will be blessed. Then James Mason, who's also unhinged, calls. There's just so many
So much going on.
there's
Yeah.
so many creepy elements to this movie.
Right.
Like until the credits roll, you're kind of like, where are we? Like,
Hmm.
is harm going to come to this woman? There are many points of the film where I felt that,
Me
whether
too.
it's self or someone else.
Hmm.
But it's just a remarkable portrait of some sort of postpartum depression, I suppose.
Yeah. Without
She's at her
actually saying
happiest when
that.
she's pregnant.
Right.
And also, it's 1964. You let your lead character actually have an abortion.
Hmm.
That was wild to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at Love with the Proper Stranger the year before, and the whole thing was like, oh, she didn't go through with it. Yay. This was like, she went through with it, and it was like people were glad she did it. It
Right.
wasn't just like, there was no torture about it. It was like, you did what you needed to do, and it was the right thing.
Yeah. It helps that she just has so many babies already that,
Yeah, it's like, well,
it's like,
it does help. It's like, you
you
have
know,
8 children.
right.
Enough.
Enough. Eight is
Like,
enough, as they say. Um, yeah, I mean, I said it recently on the 62 episode. Her performance in The Miracle Worker is incredible. And for me, this is no different. I think what she's able to do with her face and sort of like weaponizing the different shadings of her emotions and
mhm.
how they can sort of fluctuate over the course of a scene, let alone in the arc of the character, I think is really fantastic. And so much of the film, I think, really sinks or swims on the success of this performance.
Mhm.
And I can see where the film might be divisive if you don't quite feel the level of like emotional pain and sort of numbness that this character is experiencing. But
Yeah.
I find her to be very just kind of devastating here in the best way. And even if there are moments in the film where it can feel a little aimless, or some scenes are like, what exactly, or what are we going for here? She holds it
Hmm.
together, I think. And it's a clear example for me of an actor being honored for their craft and for her ability to lift the character from what's on the page. And when I say that, I think we both know that there are certain roles that come along sometimes in this category or in other categories where it's just the character is so well written, they have such
Hmm.
incredible material to work with that they're sort of helped by the strength of how it's written, you know? And it feels like some of what's being honored in those cases is like, yes, a good performance, but also, wow, what a fascinating character. Um,
Yeah.
this is
Like with
not that for me, at least.
she is the movie.
Exactly.
And she's surrounded by really good actors. It's unusual how many like people like show up in like brief roles, like
Can we
Judith
talk about
Joyce.
Maggie Smith? I mean,
What
Maggie
kind
Smith,
of name is Philpott?
Philpott.
She shows up and she's so bizarre and neurotic, and she takes to her bed, and
Hmm.
her bed in Anne Bancroft's house.
Yes,
And then you find
naturally.
out later, the husband lies, like, no, we're not sleeping together. Then later on, it's like, of course I was.
Right.
Like, it's just filled. And then James Mason is third billed, and he doesn't show up for an hour.
I know.
And then he's also very strange. We just go from vignette of strange person in her orbit to strange person in her orbit.
Right.
And in
And
fact, the kids seem like the only normal people in the
yeah,
movie.
it's true. And
And
that's
then
intentional, I think.
and it's fascinating to see her, especially with the agency that the character has in her life. That the men, make a lot of the choices for her.
Right.
Particularly her father taking her two eldest sons and putting them into boarding school. And it's such an interesting scene when she has time with them. They're so it's not estrangement in a terrible way. It's just sort of like acquaintance. There's like an acquaintanceship there because they sort of don't know how to communicate to each other. And I was so taken with how the kids wanted they were so happy to see their mother, and they so wanted to connect, but she really didn't seem like she knew how, but
Hmm.
she was really polite about it. It was very, very, and then we also have a similar scene, I guess, in Coming Up in Marriage Italian Style, where you have
Mm.
the mothers and estranged sons like encounter each other late in the
Yeah.
movie.
Right.
That was my brain this whole week. I'm watching these movies and I'm finding parallels between all of them.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I'll
okay, we have this comes up in that one and also over here.
That's from doing this show has also happened to me. Like sometimes I will fully think that one plot line happened in another film entirely because it's so similar the themes. But I think this role in someone else's hands honestly could have come across as very blank and very remote and
Hmm.
so inaccessible that you just don't get anything from it. Or it could just go so far in the other direction of emoting so much to sort of make up for the coldness of the character that
That's
it becomes
true.
just like a melodrama sort of thing and almost
Well, that's the
campy.
thing. It could easily have gone there. But
Hmm.
what's interesting is that Bancroft doesn't try to be likable, but yet she is.
Yeah,
Like
it's
she
just
doesn't.
innate for her.
It's just
Yeah.
there's like the innate like I said, when she looks at you, like she looks straight into the camera, you're like, ah,
Oh,
I
yeah.
love you. That's
Right.
that's something. It's like no wonder Mel Brooks fell madly in love with her, and she's also just so rounded, and she's such a good. That's another thing about Anne Bancroft, the actress. She's such a great listener,
Good
taking in everything that's
reactor.
going on. She
Yep.
reacts so perfectly to everything that's going on, and you end up feeling, at least in my case, I feel so much sympathy for Joe because of everything she's gone through.
Yeah.
Just
$100%.
there's an element of her too where she just wants to be happy, but she just doesn't know how.
Yeah. And that's what I mean when it's like, if another actor is in this role, I don't know if I would feel that level of innate sort of attachment to her.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, sometimes she's warm, sometimes she's cold. She's, yeah, obviously not happy about her life. She finds some fulfillment in having children. She tries to navigate certain situations more overtly with her husband, sometimes more subtly. She gets to do so many different things. and show pretty much every shade of her abilities as an actor here. So it's kind of like, when you think about it, as long as you have the right actor in this part, it is a gift of a part. I will say that, because so much of it hangs on her.
And she did all right for herself. I mean, she didn't win the Oscar, but she did. She was honored by every other body, basically.
Yeah, including Cannes Film Festival, right?
The Cannes Film Festival, the BAFTA. She was the only Golden Globe nominee for Best Actress in a Drama to make the Oscar cut, which is
incredibly rare.
That's what really struck me.
Yeah.
Because I looked at the nominees and I'm like, oh, okay, but it makes sense, And again, an actors love Anne Bancroft. That's another part of it.
I want to talk about a few specific scenes. The scene where she is wandering around the shop sort of aimlessly, and she just suddenly stops and bursts into tears, and we get this extreme close-up. She seems to be unraveling, to paraphrase the Hours, and it feels like it's like a primal, like, ugly cry. It's like the kind of cry you don't see as much in film. I find there was something that felt almost uncomfortably real about that.
It's almost voyeuristic.
Yeah, I felt
like
I was
as uncomfortable as the shoppers kind of watching her and like moving away.
Yeah,
as is common in human nature. You see someone having a breakdown, you kind of go, I'm not getting involved.
Yeah.
But it's in that close up though, where it's just like, whoa. It's like she's at her wit's end here. It's a make or break moment.
Yeah, it's really harrowing, and it's the kind of thing where just in isolation you could see that and be like, now what exactly is happening there? And even the plot isn't quite clear on why she suddenly is like having this weird out of body experience in the shop, and like sort of looking at mannequins and looking at the other people and having all of this swirling in her mind. And yet you sort of do understand, just sort of on a subconscious level, I think, why she would just suddenly be reaching that breaking point.
Yep. That's exactly. I mean, like you said, that like this. It's not so much about the plot of the story. It's really the character study of what she's going through.
Yeah.
And the way it builds. I mean, it seems like an inevitable place for her to go at that point, but it's startling that it happens in such an abrupt and surreal way, because the way it's edited, it's just. People are kind of out of focus going past her, and she's just sort of frozen in place.
Yeah.
Not going left, not going right. And you're relieved when someone actually like comes up and helps her. It's like,
because she's not getting help from other people, really.
Yeah, so it's like I was watching it the other night, and I exhaled. I was like, okay. All right. And at least in that regard, she ends up getting help.
Yes.
It may not be everything, but it sort of sets the second half of the film on its course. But it's startling work. It's also the way it's that department store lighting. It's just so
fluorescent lights and everything. Yeah.
It's just it's a garish moment. It's just unsettling, as so much is in that film. But she's just devastating.
That is the word for it, definitely. And speaking to sort of her getting help, she does get to see a psychiatrist. And that sort of is bringing out these feelings of how, like, she has some complicated feelings surrounding the idea of sex, and how, like, sex without reproduction is useless or disgusting to her. Her past husbands weren't necessary, quote unquote, to her, sort of beyond their ability to produce children with her, I guess, is the implication.
Yeah.
But then she like becomes irate at the idea of the psychiatrist going off on vacation. And she becomes like fixated on exactly where he's going. That's another one, a very curious scene. I don't know if you have a take on exactly what is happening with her there.
I just feel that we're watching someone who is unmoored. It's like she's going to dock herself with this guy, and all of a sudden he's gone, and she's like, what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Like, now what are you doing? Like, what's going on here? That's how I felt. Like, it's just like she'd been, so adrift for so long that finally someone is starting to get her back in, and then they're just gone. And I feel like she's got a lot of trust issues.
That's to put it lightly, yes.
Put it lightly.
And I mean, like, almost directly after that, we get that hair salon scene where the
Oh,
woman is just like downloading all of her insecurities to her about being undesirable after having a hysterectomy, and just going like way TMI, and how uncomfortable Anne Bancroft is registering by this entire discussion. It's very palpable for me.
well, like her sitting wide-eyed in the chair. I mean, that was my
Hmm.
reaction the first time
Yeah,
I watched it, because it isn't just TMI. It pivots to just this cruel, utterly
it
cruel,
is.
like, attack
Hmm.
verbally, not there's it's not a physical attack, but and then saying all of these salacious things about what she would do with Anne Bancroft's husband.
Husband, right?
And then like a storm, she just sort of like passes back into being normal again. But
Hmm.
it's just so unhinged.
Yeah,
And Youth Joyce is breathtaking. She's only on screen for what, like 3 minutes?
yeah.
Something like that. It's memorable. It is really one of the most memorable moments in the entire movie.
Hmm. That's one of those performances that my friend Nathaniel Rogers often cites, like these sort of one scene wonders in a film that you almost
Yeah.
want to give them like some kind of acknowledgement, even if they're not quite a supporting role, quote unquote. It's like, wow, what they're doing with that one scene. Ugh.
It's true. It's like it's sort of a couple more minutes and she,
Yeah,
qualifies as Beatrice Straight. I mean,
yeah, truly.
it's just a remarkable, because it is a cameo, but it really, and it's just sort of like we step out of her drama to see someone else's,
Mm.
which I guess might be worse. Like, that woman is
Yeah,
not going to get help.
no.
She's going to go through all of this stuff with the hysterectomy, which comes up again later, but
Hmm.
it just really adds it adds a dimension. In some ways, you're like, okay, maybe it's not so bad for you. At least that was what I was
Yeah,
thinking. Like things are bad, but this woman is clearly like off a
could be
cliff.
worse. Yeah,
Yeah,
or maybe that could be me in the future. I don't know. I don't know if she's thinking that, but you know,
maybe.
yeah.
I mean, I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of places in the film where you're sort of left to take what you want from it.
Hmm.
Like, there's a lot of vague moments, a lot of interesting cuts and segues where you're like, is that supposed to be this or can it be that? And that was one of those ones where we sort of stop and go, wow, other crazy people exist.
Hmm. Yeah, there's also, I think, this very affecting scene where her father dies, and she has this sort of exchange with her mother, who's grieving and trying to process everything, and Joe just like drops it on her that she might have another baby, despite not discussing that with her husband at all. After which point, her mother, of course, spills the beans to him, which creates this very awkward moment. These are the scenes where I just feel just like the dread and the tension just is,
Hmm.
it's almost unbearable, in the sense that I want to look away and I want to be distant from this film, this performance, almost just to be like, this
Hmm.
is too close for comfort. I don't know how I'm feeling about this. But I do think that that is entirely intentional, because it is trying to get you in the mindset of this woman and how she lives day to
Well,
day.
I'm watching she's walking with the mother is walking with them, and she and I realize, like, oh my God, she's gonna say something, and I'm like, shut up, mom, shut up, no, don't, don't,
Hmm.
don't. And then she doesn't. It's like, oh no. Like,
Yeah.
I felt bad. I felt so bad for Joe, because I could tell that she needed to tell someone who wasn't her husband
Hmm.
before she told him. And just the mother choosing to go the mother who's also a little odd.
Yeah.
There's some oddities to her. Not so much as some others, but everyone is just sort of a little off kilter in this movie,
Yeah.
including her father, her imperious father who makes choices for her.
Hmm.
But it was so uncomfortable. Like I said, it's a tweak here, a tweak there, and you just got like a horror movie.
Oh yeah, that's how I felt. I felt like I was holding my breath for through so many scenes. But yeah, I mean, she has the procedure, as we mentioned earlier, abortion, and you see her really sort of coming to terms with her decision, and how it would likely mean, of course, she wouldn't be able to get pregnant again, but that they could move to the country and be happy,
Mm-hmm.
try to find that happiness again. And she's sort of like half laughing, half crying. It's just kind of this like exhaling of all of this stuff that's within her. I love that scene too.
It's such a release for her,
Hmm.
and something she's needed. She's needed because it's been in her head for so long about all of this that it's like, okay, this is the pivot that gives me the life I want, even if it's not exactly what she ends up getting, because she still got that one surprise to go.
Yeah. Obviously we get the infidelity stuff that's going on in the middle of all this, which when she finds that out, and the kind of slowly creeping like devastation of realizing that, yeah, he's off doing his thing that she suspected he was doing.
Right.
Her attacking him pretty viciously after she finds that out, that he's gonna have this mistress's baby.
Yeah, right after she's just like, okay, I will shut down, the
Right.
baby making factory here
Yeah.
for you. I
Mm-hmm.
will do this for our marriage. And then he's
Mm-hmm.
out with this woman and gets her pregnant. I mean, I could see that being the greatest betrayal for her out of it all.
Yeah.
Like, I did all of this for you. I cut my own ability to be fertile out of my life for you, and you're out procreating.
Yeah. It's the ultimate betrayal. Yeah.
It really is. So
Mm-hmm.
and it's the way it unfolds to that is just so odd because that man knocks on the door looking for donations or whatever, and she opens up and there's just sort of like this weird moment. She's just like, "Come in." And she's like, "Of course." Like,
Mm.
and you're like, you are not in the frame of mind to be letting strangers into your house right now.
No.
And then James Mason calls, and it's
Mm.
just so weird. It's tense. It's the tension of that scene. And the immediate release when we cut to her pummeling him, Peter Finch, that is,
Right.
she just wails on him for it's like a 45-second fight sequence.
Oh yeah.
She just
Super like, physical.
lets him
Yeah.
have it.
Mm-hmm.
But what surprises me about what really, and it got me the second time too, is you have the scene and then you cut to her in bed, clearly after sex, smoking the cigarette. But then it pans out and you realize, oh, she's sleeping with her second husband. And it's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. Because it was like, okay, she's like, well, if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me.
Right. And to that I say, good for her.
Good for
Uh,
her.
good for her
I like that
cinema.
she has a good relationship with that ex too, because it's a
I
very
know. Yeah.
the way the film sets you
Very
up, you
modern.
know that they're together at the in that one sequence at the beginning of the film, and then you cut to Peter Finch asking for her hand in marriage, and it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's the other thing. It's structured so weird because she's roaming about the house, and then we flash back. Then she's roaming about the house in the present, then we flash back again. It's just a really great role for an actress.
Mm-hmm.
And she rises to the occasion with such aplomb.
And again, it feels very intentional what the filmmaker's doing by giving you
Yes.
that sense of disorientation, because it is matching what she is bringing to it.
Mm-hmm.
But then, by the end, he very much detaches from her, Peter Finch, which causes her to retreat to the old house where she used to live, and just the emptiness, the sort of stark nature of her feelings by the end of this film. It's you feel like you've been put through the ringer as much as she has.
Yes.
And then Jake, him coming with the kids to come and bring food. There's sort of like an attempt for reconciliation, which she sort of accepts. But
It's
what
it's a it's a qualified mea culpa.
yes, right, exactly. But what I love is that there is kind of an implication that not everything is fixed here. She's
Yeah.
still going to have to deal with these very complicated emotions. And I don't find it to be a particularly satisfying ending, but only because of how true to life it is. Like, you
Yeah.
feel like maybe things are going to be okay for a little while between them, but it's not like she's completely
No.
healed or whatever of what's been sort of plaguing her. It's a really draining experience by the
Like
end.
they're still gonna have to deal with the fallout of him getting that actress pregnant.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a lot to unpack there.
There's so much
Um,
going on, but it's that's part of it. The ending, it doesn't wrap everything up, and it's sort of like we leave them on a truce,
hmm
not a treaty.
right.
So
Yeah.
I hope she does. And what's also, and I just want to jump back into this, is she's such a wonderful mother. Like no matter what's
hmm
going on, she is the two eldest kids aside because they're not with her, but the overwhelming love she has for her children is just remarkable to me.
Yeah.
And
You
they
feel
have
it.
such consideration and care for her. It's like they're aware that mom is not okay, and there's an incredible amount of empathy toward her from them.
Hmm.
And that was a dynamic that I really loved.
Yeah, because if we didn't have that, it would kind of just feel like
It would be very bleak.
torturing this woman
Like there
almost.
needs to be something's got to give when it comes to what this woman is going through.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a very modern feeling film in that sense, really experimenting with the form, giving you that open for interpretation kind of ending. And
Hmm.
yeah, this central performance here, I think, still is something that will resonate with viewers all these years later. That feeling of isolation and depression and, postpartum depression also, which is very much, I think, what she's going through,
Yeah.
even if it's not commented on directly. I just think this is one of the films here that really holds up. That's Anne Bancroft. Do you have any other thoughts you wanted to mention before we move on?
Well, it's interesting because The Pumpkin Eater is a kind of a hard film to find.
Yeah.
I now own it on Blu-ray. I got the Anne Bancroft box
Ooh.
set, so I have it.
Ooh. Nice.
But it's something I had to DVR from TCM
Me too,
because
actually.
it's not really something you can find, and it's
Mm-hmm.
not really widely seen. So I was looking at it, and it didn't make much of a splash back in 1964. In fact, it helped bring down the production company. It didn't do well financially,
Yeah.
and everyone's trying to point blame, and James Mason blamed the script, and so did the author of the novel it was based on. And I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe it was just a little bit ahead of its time in 1964.
I think so. Absolutely.
If this film came out in 1968, we're talking maybe screenplay nomination,
Mm-hmm.
supporting actor nomination. I don't know about picture, but
Oh yeah, I could see
just
it.
I just think it was just like just a little bit ahead of its time.
Mm-hmm.
It's also so forward thinking in a lot of what it does. Reductive and dated in some ways, but for 1964,
I'll take it. Yeah.
it's really asking a lot of an audience.
Yeah.
And I do recommend everyone just seeking it out because she is so worth watching if you can find it.
If you can find it. Well, let's move on to the next nominee, Sophia Loren for Marriage Italian Style. So we have the other very recent Best Actress winner here, returning with her second nomination. Unfortunately, this is still the last nomination that Sophia Loren received. But in another sense, her getting this follow up nomination so soon after her first is very much mirroring the other Italian Best Actress winner, Anna Magnani. So she is increasing her popularity even further after that Oscar win for Two Women, starring in multiple films every year, including Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, The Fall of the Roman Empire, and then, Marriage Italian Style, starring alongside Marcello Mastroianni, as she did throughout many films in her career, including this one. And Marriage Italian Style, of course, is another Italian film. It was also nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, I believe, at the previous Oscars.
It was the next year.
Okay, next year. There you go.
It's a weird rule.
It's always confusing. But yeah, it was beloved not only for her performance, but as a film. And it tells the story of Domenico, played by Marcello Mastroianni, this businessman who meets Filomena, played by Sophia Loren, who's this young woman he meets at a brothel and proceeds to have a 22-year relationship with, off and on, which mostly involves him treating her terribly and her loving him anyway, until there's a point where she becomes visibly ill and they get married on her deathbed, at which point things take a dramatic turn, which we will get into. So, what are your feelings on Sophia Loren as an actress, whether you've seen Two Women, her Oscar-winning performance, and your thoughts here on this follow-up nomination?
She is really one of, like I said it earlier, she's one of the finest actresses of the 20th century. She is so good on camera. And, we think of, she's one of those people that she's so beautiful, but you don't think about that because she's just so good. Like the package is all there because she's one of the most beautiful women of the 20th century, but the acting is so grounded, so intense. The talent is just so immense, and she is so charming. If you watch any like going back to like Houseboat and things like that, like she is a charming presence. And what grabbed me about Marriage Italian Style is that it was not at all what I expected it to be. I expected I really knew very little going into it. I thought it was going to be, this sort of sexy Italian romp. And there are elements of a sex comedy to it. But there is incredible pathos and just, I mean, she's called upon to play a woman from like the age of 17 to 40 at
Mm-hmm.
like what she was, what, 29, 30 when this movie was made.
Yeah.
And it's just, it was, every scene was a surprise to me because I didn't know where the film was going to go, and it had me laughing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like particularly with her scene with the deathbed marriage and all that. But there are some really compelling dramatic moments for the character that she just essayed beautifully. And I was wondering, my thought was like, well, Anne Bancroft would win, obviously. But now watching this, I'm like, I don't know. Like, Sophia's just so stupendous, just utterly stupendous. I wonder if she hadn't won prior, would she have had more of a push?
I think that is a
Because,
Twitter question we got later, so we'll
oh,
see.
okay.
Yeah.
It's really so wonderful, particularly a scene late in the film. You're probably going to discuss this in a minute, but the
Mm-hmm.
scene with her sons
Yes.
was where I ascended.
Yeah, I will definitely be getting into that. First of all, though, again, want to establish love Sophia Loren, another one where I absolutely adore her winning performance, and I think her follow-up nomination here, while it doesn't quite hit the emotional high points, I think, of Two Women for me, it does give her the opportunity to show another side of her incredible skills as an actress, blending the comedy with the drama. I had also never seen this film before this. I thought I had, but I think I realized that I was thinking of Divorce Italian Style. But I went into this very blind as well. I didn't look up much into it, what it was about, other than knowing it was about a marriage and that it was sort of comedic in tone, and also that it was this collaboration of these two great people who worked all the time with each
Hmm.
other. Didn't know that there were twists coming. I truly had no idea what to expect. And yeah, I walked away just on a high just from watching what Sophia Loren does. If anyone listening hasn't watched it and doesn't want it spoiled, because we're going to talk spoilers, please seek it out. Don't read anything and then come back and listen to this review, because I don't want to ruin this too much for people. But we can't talk about it without getting into it. You know what I mean? So
Right.
yeah, she's really good here. Just leave it at that for people. So once you're back, we can talk about it. I mean, I talked about the kind of rawness and the naturalism of her performance in Two Women on that episode. And I think it's to her credit that she's doing something pretty different here in a sort of mainstream-ish comedy and adapting her style of performing, which is to just like this force of personality, fierce ability to make you laugh and cry, this kind of emotional directness, and put that onto a character where I think your understanding of who she is and what's motivating her changes significantly from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. And that's kind of why I would almost compare this to what is asked of like Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl, in the sense that in the beginning of that film, she's decent enough, but it feels like she's sort of stuck in that one mode. But then there's that turn where everything opens up so much for her dramatically, and the real sort of juice of her performance is in that back half. And you see the contrast, I think, of who we think she is at the beginning as this sort of love struck young woman without a whole lot beyond that, versus what's really going on. And I think her performance is all the more impressive because of that sort of contrast, at least for me anyway. Did you find that to sort of be the case?
It is. There's such an enormous payoff in Marriage
Yeah.
Italian Style,
Mm-hmm.
based on where you go with her. You see her, young and during the war and surviving the bombing, and then running into him and then being kept, and it's just sort of like, oh, okay. But once it pivots and you realize all of the narrative that we haven't seen to that point, because we're jumping around a bit,
A lot. Yeah.
where there's a lot of jumping,
Mm-hmm.
and to see everything that she does with how enterprising her character is to fake the illness.
There it is.
Spoiler, there
Yep.
is.
Yeah.
She basically, folks, she's on her deathbed in a very she's about to lose him to a 20-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden she gets very ill. She takes to her bed. They call the priest. They're ready to administer last rites. And so we jump around and get, well, I guess it would be, we get a perspective of how the relationship started and how it continued through the years. But she's much smarter than you realize.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also just so funny. She gets him to marry her on her deathbed, and then she leaps out of bed. And it's so, it's hilarious and sad and wonderful. It is just so many things at the same time. And his shock is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And then and it's a failed attempt because they're like, you have no legal standing, you know.
Yeah.
But it all builds up to her sons, which is also something that we get to realize. And my question to you about the sons, do you think they're all his?
No,
Okay.
I do not.
I'm still not 100% certain about that because she was able to manipulate a lot for herself. There's part of me that thinks that they're all his, but she only said that so that he would. Anyway, that was something that came up in my head about that movie.
Yeah.
But she has that scene where they meet her as their mother for the first time.
Mm.
She reveals to, and it's really the scene of the film. It's
Yeah.
it's tremendous work from Sophia Loren as she's connecting with these boys. They're all different ages, and they've been raised in different locations, secreted away, and the way she opens up about herself, about her life, it just captivated me. I don't know that I breathed while she was speaking. That's where she took me on that. And I think I like when she was done, I just had sort of this sigh because it was just such a beautifully done scene and she delivered it so perfectly. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's why she was nominated.
I think so. It's 100%, and that is the same. It's definitely the MVP, the Oscar scene, quote unquote, of this whole film for
Hmm.
her. And, the whole thing of explaining how she's been a part of their lives, even with them not knowing she was their mother, either through giving
Yeah.
them gifts or making polite conversation with them in public and whatnot. And she goes into her past of like growing up poor and sort of ashamed and hoping they'll be okay with having a mother like her, which is so heartbreaking. And just her openness, it's her vulnerability is really selling the idea, I think, of a woman with regrets, but
Yeah.
someone who is also a survivor, someone who knows how to adapt. And it's
Yeah.
just like that sense of patience also and understanding that her sons are having to process this in
Yeah.
very different ways. I don't know. It really just harkens back to that very natural sort of maternal instincts presence that she has in two women of just loving her children no matter what, and sort of knowing that not all of them are going to be on board with this right away, and that maybe
Hmm.
it'll take time for one of them, but that she'll still love them no matter what because they're her babies.
Yeah.
It's really sweet. But I did just want to go back to my own reaction to that twist moment, in terms of just finally being caught up to the present again. Because, like, up to that point, I'm like, sure, she's doing a fine job here. I like how it's sort of peppering in, now looking back in hindsight, just those little disappointment moments throughout the years that are really sort of building and building for her. And you see just like, why is she like sort of taking all of this for this horrible guy who treats her horribly, even though yes, he gives her a house and everything, but it's like it all just feels like, here you go, I'm not going to really take you out in public or anything, I'm just going to sort of hide you away in a sense. But when we finally get to the present again, after all of that happens and she pops out of bed and whatnot, the opening the curtain moment, and him like watching him on the phone talking to this, mistress, fully sober, not dying at all, to say that, she's in fact his wife now. That was like Oscar cheers moment for me. Like, I
It's
love
so
when a woman,
unexpected,
yes, I love when a woman is getting one over on a guy.
especially
And
one as rotten as he has been.
truly, the worst.
because she's given him so much of
Mm-hmm.
herself, and she's accepted a lot of what the situation is. Like, all right, she took care of the ailing mother, and she's living in the
Yeah.
servants' quarters. When she
Mm-hmm.
moved out of the servants' quarters, I was like, yes, finally, thank you.
Yeah.
She puts up with so much of him, and finally it sort of it takes the power away from him in a way. It's the first time in the movie where he's really unsettled. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what? Because he's very controlling and very demanding and very
Mm-hmm.
wealthy, and there's all of this stuff going on, and he expects everyone to cater to his own whims. And so finally, after all of these years, she finally just twists it and turns it on him. Like, what is it, 22 years?
Yeah. 22 years.
22 years they've known each other. And that's the other thing, is like, she's playing older at this point, and
Mm-hmm.
she's doing it really well.
Yeah.
Again, character actress. She's
Mm-hmm. Totally.
just so great. And
Mm-hmm.
but what I loved is that they put her in the house, and then he assigns his people to her, like the housekeeper and whatnot, and they become so devoted to her. Like, that housekeeper would kill for her.
Yeah.
Uh, she cracked me up
So would I.
every time that housekeeper appeared on screen. It was something hilarious.
Yeah.
She was like, I don't know if you can have comic relief in something that's somewhat comic, but she brought so many wonderful needed laughs throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And just it added to Sophia's performance, just having all of these wonderful people around her doing really great work too.
Definitely. Yeah. When we get the flashback right after that and seeing it from her perspective, I was like, oh shit, here we go. Now we're going to really learn what the real story is. Keep in mind, again, I had no idea what the structure of this film was going to be. So I did not
Mm-hmm.
know that this was going to be this sort of film. But yeah, getting the whole revelation that she has these three children, the fact that it's sort of revealed very naturally like that, three young boys who she has some other people sort of taken care of. And now she wants to be married to Domenico because of his status, because of his name. I was like, wow, okay, I see you, Sophia Loren, look at you. And I think she pulls off the kind of like, at one point I was meek a bit and sort of weak, and now I'm strong. That sort of like evolution, I think, is very natural. Because it's like she's
It's
just built up this armor over the years, and now she's like, I am ready. I'm going to fight fire with fire. I'm going to use the same sort of manipulation that you used on me. I'm going to use it
mm-hmm.
right back on you, and you're not going to see it coming.
And it's so delicious. Just so absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. The whole thing after of her like in the office, obviously, with the whole like, this marriage isn't exactly like valid because you sort of tricked him to feel like you're on your deathbed. And I feel like in the beginning, I felt like, is she just pretending she doesn't understand what she did was fraud? But it's made clear to her, and we understand that she knew what she was doing. And it's a credit to her and to the film that it's not a great thing what she did here, sort of faking an illness to try to trick a guy into marrying her, but we just have so much sympathy for her anyway. That's how
Yeah.
I felt.
Well, that's part of it. We've seen how he's been to her the whole time, and it's like, well, she deserves something in turn.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, okay, you allowed this to happen, Domenico. You're the reason.
Yeah.
You set the stage for all of this. And I felt, again at that scene, I was like, ah, like, oh, they're like, the marriage is null and void. I was just like, ah,
Yeah. She almost got away with it. Yeah.
almost got away with it. Because you're really cheering for her at this point.
Totally.
When you find out that everything that she has done has this maternal element, this protective maternal element to her. It blows the character wide open, and she's not at all what you thought she was from the first half of the movie. You get to know her for herself more so. She's not just this, dumb woman out in the country who was rescued. She's got a whole bunch of stuff happening inside of her, and you fall in love with her.
Yeah. I mean, like by the end, with the two of them sort of realizing that even in spite of everything, they probably do just love each other and have like a proper wedding. I think she does by the end sort of sell the complicated feelings of loving this guy for all these years,
Mm-hmm.
despite how irritating he can be, to put it lightly, and him just loving her as well. And it sort of is this feeling of it's almost like they're even at this point. Like they
Yeah,
both have tricked each other so much that it's like fine. It's like this begrudging respect almost by the end, I think, and sort of
yeah.
resolving that. Yeah, maybe we kind of do belong together. Like we've been through so much already. We should probably just take care of these kids and just sort of, you know, do our
But
thing. We
it
both learned our lesson.
and for him, it's when the three sons refer to him as dad. It's like
Yes.
it's really a heartwarming moment. He doesn't
Hmm.
necessarily deserve it, but it's very sweet that it happens.
Right.
It just I felt so wonderful after watching.
Hmm.
And I did all of I live with my brother. I did all of this watching with him, and
Mm.
like as soon as the movie ended, he's like, "That's it. Sophia's the winner. I don't care."
Wow.
That was his take on it. She's like, "Sophia's the
Yeah.
best."
It's hard to argue after watching it too. I mean, by the end, she's also crying because it's
She
sort of been
finally
set
cries.
up earlier that she hasn't had anything to cry for because she hasn't had like happiness or anything. So she's just been like numb for so
Yeah,
long. And now she finally gets that emotional release.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
it's this
payoff. It's a
wonderful
payoff for
payoff.
her, and it's a payoff for us.
Yeah.
Just a
So
joyous, lovely film. And is she the first Best Actress nominee to say "fuck you" in a movie?
that sounds right.
Because
I wish
that
I
was
could say it
something.
was someone like Marie Dressler, but you know, I wish
Yeah,
she
that's
could.
that's what Dinner at Eight needed.
Right?
Um, no, she there were elements of it being an Italian film that they were able to go places that
Right.
Hollywood would not go with that movie. Like they would like Marriage Italian style done as an American movie. You're gonna have let's say it's Sophia Loren, but they're gonna clean that up. They're
It's gonna
probably
be
gonna make it.
sanitized.
It's gonna be like a Doris Day romp where she's not really a prostitute, or there's some sort
Not
of
really. Right.
there's gonna be some twists.
Mm-hmm.
The kid is not gonna have a problem going to the bathroom. I mean, there are certain
Yeah.
that was something that made me go, "What?" I'm like, "All right, this is the movie.
Yeah.
This is, this is the movie
Roll
they
with it.
wanted to sell." Like
Yep.
that was it. I just rolled with it, and it
Yeah.
was delightful.
Yeah. So I mean, 2 for 2 here, I would say, in terms of recommending films that do, I think I would say this one is pretty modern too. You know, you don't have to work too hard to like understand what's happening here.
Yeah, and it doesn't feel dated in its sexual politics either, because you
I
have
don't think so. Yeah.
because the dynamics are very relatable,
Yes. Marriage is complicated.
extremely, especially when you don't want to be married.
Yes. All right. Let's move on to our next nominee, Miss Debbie Reynolds in The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Just the opportunity to get to finally talk about Debbie Reynolds, even if it's just this once, this being her one and only Oscar nomination. But she's obviously a legend, an icon. She began her career in the late 40s. She had her biggest breakout, of course, in Singing in the Rain when she was only 18, I believe. So that's what a performance at 18. She did other musicals. She was nominated for a Golden Globe for Bundle of Joy, which she did with her then husband, Eddie Fisher. She won the National Board of Review for The Catered Affair, so she was pretty popular at the time, especially in that 50s to 70s-ish era. And with this, the director, Charles Walters, did not want Debbie Reynolds at first to play this role. He wanted Shirley MacLaine, which I would say makes a lot of sense when you just watch this film and this character. But she was unavailable, so Debbie steps in, and apparently he changed his tune about halfway through filming and decided, yes, she was right for the part. So let's talk about if we think she was. So The Unsinkable Molly Brown is based on a stage musical about the titular Molly Brown, who was a real-life woman who lived a fascinating life, socialite. She eventually was on the Titanic and helped to save some of the other passengers. In terms of the musical and the film, that's one of the only things that's probably true to her life, because this is largely a fictionalizing of her story, where we see her go from tomboy to wife to suddenly rich person to person who tries to fit into high society but struggles to do so. Eventually she goes to Europe, makes some friends there, eventually comes back and is part of the Titanic disaster. So let's talk Debbie. I'm curious what thoughts you have on the iconic Debbie Reynolds as an actress, her legacy, her relationship with Carrie Fisher, her other work, whatever you want to start with, and then what you think of her here in this performance.
This gives me a chance to say lovely things about Debbie Reynolds, who really was one of the great movie stars. She was a wonderful performer on screen, on stage. She really had remarkable talent, remarkable energy, charisma. She was gorgeous. She was funny. She was everything you want in a movie star. And she was the girl next door for many years in the 50s. And she also did so many interesting performances. Like there's obviously Singing in the Rain. We talk about Molly Brown, which was a huge hit in 1964.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was the 8th highest grossing film of the year. But she was also in The Catered Affair. She was in Rat Race. She was My Sixth Love. She tried different things. She wasn't just content to like one area of filmmaking. It wasn't like she got pigeonholed like other MGM musical stars. She was actually able to do Bundle of Joy and light comedies. And then later on, as a character actress, I think she should have had a second Oscar nomination for Mother in 1996. Because that's one of her finest film performances. She's in Albert Brooks's movie. She's unbelievably terrific in that. And so I love watching Debbie Reynolds in almost anything I see. And I have memories of watching Unsinkable Molly Brown as a kid because it was on every once in a while. And I remember enjoying it at the time, but the more I revisit the Unsinkable Molly Brown as an adult, the less I like it, for myriad reasons. One, I found out that she was never called Molly Brown when she was alive. That for some reason that really bothers me. I was on the Molly Brown website reading all the myths and everything, and the musical is taken from posthumous mythologies of Molly Brown that were written in the 30s and built upon. So she did get a lot of money, and she did go to Europe, and she did sail on the Titanic, and she did marry J.J. Brown. But she was a remarkable woman who was well educated. She was not orphaned. Her parents were very progressive. They believed in women being educated and schooled. And so she was incredibly well educated. She believed in education for children. She was interested in child welfare, workers' rights, women's rights. She was a fighter for women's suffrage. And I feel like there is a true story waiting to be told by someone about the real Mrs. Margaret Brown. So now that I've said that, The Unsinkable Molly Brown, it's Meredith Willson. It was his stage follow-up to The Music Man. And it was a hit, but not the sensation that The Music Man was back in New York. You had Tammy Grimes and Harve Presnell in the role. I mean, it made Tammy Grimes a stage star. She was billed under the title for playing the title role. So she won the Best Supporting Actress in a Musical role for The Unsinkable Molly Brown. And she's terrific. She's really terrific on the album and on a live tape that exists of her performance. So you have the movie, and Shirley MacLaine does make a lot of sense. It's like, okay, I could see how we pivot to her.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder what sort of film it might have been with her, because at that point she did have more of a stage background than Debbie did. But Debbie's performance in Unsinkable Molly Brown for me is very big. It's sort of a like, what would Betty Hutton do? Revisiting it as an adult, I was reminded of Betty Hutton's performance in the film version of Annie, Get Your Gun. Like, she's playing to the back of a theater instead of to the camera at certain points of the film.
Yeah.
And it doesn't click for me like it used to. And I say this as someone who loves her a lot. I don't love this performance, and I really don't love this movie.
Yeah. I mean, like many people, obviously also love Debbie Reynolds. She just had like that sort of effervescent quality and just this also genuine love for like show business and entertainment. You could tell she really cared about the sense of community in the business. She cared for other people. Just a very positive force in the world. And I think that's also how Hollywood definitely thought of her too, especially after scandal with Elizabeth Taylor taking away Eddie Fisher. She was seen as the kind of pure innocent in all of that. Obviously, I also love her later work, which is how I was introduced to her as a kid. You know, things like Halloween Town, Will and Grace, things like that. Singing in the Rain, of course. You know, just stuff that everyone sort of loves her for. The joy she captured, and especially in Singing in the Rain. And when you consider her sort of icon status, I think it's definitely surprising in hindsight that she only got this one Oscar nomination. Maybe, I don't know if, was it something with the roles that just didn't quite line up the right way. Maybe she wasn't taken seriously enough. I don't know. But I hadn't really gotten around to The Unsinkable Molly Brown until a few years ago, actually. So this is only my second time viewing it. I remember thinking it was pretty goofy, but that Debbie Reynolds was like charming enough, giving it her all, whatnot. Watching it again, I love Debbie. She's a wonderful screen presence. I'm not really the biggest fan of what she's doing here either. I think the beginning portion of the film is pretty rough, where she's trying to be sort of like this overeager tomboy, sort of playing it like a kind of child star of the 30s almost, like a Jackie Cooper type.
It's a remarkably broad opening.
Yeah.
Like for the first hour of the movie, she's pitched at 11.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's out of the gate into I ain't down yet, this rough and tumble number, but I don't know if I'm seeking nuance. It's just that there may not be enough for her to play in that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes down to the writing of the character, because it's very tropey. It's a fish out of water story, this rise. And then the whole thing is about her getting money and still being, this tomboyish type in a dress, and how money seems to corrupt her.
Mm-hmm.
And she has to be reminded. There's like a Hallmark original movie quality to the script.
Yeah.
She has to be reminded of who she is by the end. And I want to compare it to Tammy Grimes, just one last thing. Mm-hmm. In that live tape of Tammy Grimes on stage in a performance of The Unsinkable Molly Brown, she is more nuanced than Debbie is on screen. And that's striking to me, because I listened to one and it's like it should be the reverse.
It should, yeah.
And that's what strikes me, because it feels like Debbie in Unsinkable Molly Brown, to me, feels like Ethel Merman doing Call Me Madam. Like, it's a stage level performance for a camera, as opposed to a film performance. Though by the end of the movie, she, like, all of a sudden she's coiffed like Deborah Carr and talking like Cary Grant. Like, where does her accent go the second time she goes to Europe?
Yeah.
How did that happen? She's like playing an entirely different person.
Yeah.
It's just very, very strange. And it just, there's something hollow about the whole thing to me. Like, it doesn't jibe with me so well. Like, that big number in her house should be like a rollicking yay, we're all here. And I'm uncomfortable because I'm like, everyone in that room is uncomfortable because she's dancing with a duchess. I don't know. There's just, it didn't hit the marks for me. And they cut a lot of the stage score out. There's a significant amount of songs that were cut for the movie.
It feels like that by the second half. It's like, I forgot this was a musical.
Yeah, we get into it gets very melodramatic once we get to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the license that's taken with the true story and everything. And it's very little Titanic. It's what she's most known for, and it's like a bit.
That whole scene is very funny to me because they're using like archival footage, I think, from like the exteriors of the Titanic, when it's like tinted this weird, like, I think is green color, or it's just some sort of monocolor. And it's, it feels almost obligatory. Like, we have to include this part, even though we don't really have like the proper staging for it.
It's the same in the stage show. It's not the focus of it, even though it's really the biggest part of her legacy. Yeah. And I was reading on the Molly Brown website that because they have, there's a historic site in Denver and whatnot, that also the depiction by Kathy Bates is not accurate either. Like, there's still a story to be told.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
But it's just these few minutes where she's back to being, Act 1 Molly Brown on this lifeboat. Mm-hmm. And then we cut to her. My brother's like, my brother said about her, it's like, she did all of that stuff in real life, and yet all this movie cares about is that she and Gladys made up.
Apparently, yeah. That's the emotional through line. Yeah.
It's disappointing in that regard, because it probably could have been a better film, even with the limitations of the material. It's just that I feel like she needed to be reined in more, and we've seen her in many other roles, being so many different things. So the potential for it is there. Yeah. It's a little too much gusto at the beginning.
Yeah, I think the performance gets better as it goes along, and she does drops the tomboy act. I think she's just more natural in that, more not refined, but just like less of all of that aggressive energy. But yeah, I think compared to the other performances in the other films here, it just never reaches the heights of the other nominees or films. The film just feels very disposable to me. It's just like so unbelievably corny that I don't even know if it's going for like a campiness or what exactly I'm supposed to be feeling about it. Is it supposed to feel like parody? Because that's what I'm feeling in these moments.
Well, it's that there's that one scene you mentioned, that the scene where he brings back all that mound of cash to the cabin,
Yeah.
and she stores it in the stove,
In
and
the
all of a
stove.
sudden, and all of a sudden we're in like an I Love Lucy situation.
Yeah.
It gets very sitcom-y,
Very sitcom.
and spoiler alert, he lights the stove on fire.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Yes. Could see it coming a mile away. Yeah.
But she's done like that sort of tomboyish hick routine like in Tammy and the Bachelor. And she's much more nuanced and interesting in that. If you've ever seen it, I don't know if you have.
I haven't.
It's really lovely. It's a lovely little comedy from 1957, and she's radiant in it. Again, Debbie Reynolds is a radiant person, and I love her. And I don't wish to be saying bad things about her performance, but it's not her best moment.
Yeah, not her finest hour. I get why she would be sort of proud of it and attached to it. Obviously, it comes with this Oscar nomination and everything, and it's just, there's so much going on here. I'm sure she was fascinated by the life of this woman and everything. There's a reason why she would later play her on the stage again, right? So,
and it was a hit.
Right.
We have to, it connected with audiences in
and I could see it being
1964.
more successful as a performance and as a property on the stage, because if you look at this film, that's just kind of what it feels like for the most part. I mean, I like that they at least, film on location and everything. It doesn't look overtly stagey at those moments, but
right.
It's, of the films here, again, it's definitely the most dated feeling. Was there a particular musical performance for her specifically that you felt like was a highlight?
Song-wise, I love the song I Ain't Down Yet. It's sort of the Harold Hill number.
Yeah.
And it's just a song I love. And I've actually seen Tammy Grimes do it live. It's one of my bragging rights. But I think that because so much of the score is gone, like that and Belly Up to the Bar Boys is a lot of fun.
I like that.
And it features there are in the number there are 3 prostitutes, I guess you'd call them, who arrive at the saloon, and the older one is played by a woman named Maria Kornilova, who it was her only film appearance of note. And she is a Tony Award winner. She was the original Golda in Fiddler on the Roof. Oh. She was one of the strippers in the original Gypsy, and she had an extensive stage career. And so it is, for people who love musical theater, it's important to watch so you can see a glimpse of why she hit so big on the stage, because she was a tremendous dancer and character actress combined. And that's for me, that's a lovely thing to see.
Yeah. In terms of, for me, like more scenes that sort of connect, I do like when we finally have them moving into this mansion where they're clearly very lonely and ostracized in this community because they don't exactly come from money. They go to this party and it's another kind of cartoonish scene, but I like that we finally, it feels like we have something of substance that we're talking about.
Well, there's finally like a real sort of conflict going on.
Right. That's what I mean. Like, it feels like we're finally clicking into something.
To get there.
Yeah, which is like over an hour into it. Yeah.
It's really, the film and the stage musical spend too much time with her sort of pre-Denver.
Yeah.
And the sooner you get to Denver with the money and everything, the sooner it starts to click into place.
Right.
It's that first hour is rough.
It's a lot to get through. But eventually they dress the part at least, but they just don't fit in. So it becomes sort of like a mini class conflict in a way.
You have Audrey Christie is like, you don't belong here, essentially.
Yeah, straight up. Yeah. And then with her like deciding to throw this party at their mansion, but of course no one comes. I think she plays the sort of wounded pride of that really well. But of course they thrive in Europe, where they're taking lessons in French and learn about fine art and all this sort of stereotypical things, meeting these sort of society friends. I actually kind of enjoy these scenes, especially the dinner party where she's like hosting everyone. And I just feel like she just has so much like easy charisma in these moments as she's sort of entertaining everyone, saying how she's like a hog for knowledge, those kinds of things. There's just something with those scenes I felt was very real life Debbie Reynolds to me, that I think she really there was something very much like this sense of community and, you know, very charismatic. And I think that's just kind of a mode that she fit into really well. So again, I appreciated when it felt like the film was going to a more natural place for her, as opposed to really just like throwing her all of this sort of almost slapsticky comic moments in the first hour. I appreciated that they highlighted her more easygoing, sort of charismatic, natural presence, if that makes sense. So I don't think this is a performance that is like altogether bad necessarily. I just think the material really kind of isn't the right fit for her for the most part, even though it makes sense that you would sort of cast her in a role like this. I don't know if the singing voice is really quite there. So,
she doesn't really sing, she sells the numbers.
Yes, shouted again to the rafters.
Like she enters that film like she was shot out of a cannon.
Yeah, so it's a strange place to start in, to sort of ease your way into it, because you're immediately like, oh god, okay, I have to adjust to this. You know, so once it sort of settles a little, I appreciate it more.
You pivot to the fish out of water story. Suddenly there's something going on there. You have some steady character support. Hermione Badley shows up, who is in 2 of our Best Actress nominees this year.
That's right. Character actress Hermione Badley.
And then you're able to see how that plays out, and it does pick up the pace once that happens.
Yeah.
But she plays Hermione plays Buttercup, the down-to-earth mother of the snob Audrey Christie, Gladys, who lives next door and is the creme de la creme of Denver society.
Yes, of course.
And and Angela Lansbury's mother is one of the society ladies. I wanted to throw that out there.
I did not know that.
Moyna McGill, who was also in My Fair Lady.
There you go. Look at that.
Is one of the society friends that she picks up in Europe along the way. But it's not a long movie, but it feels longer than it is. Feels pretty long.
Yeah. Feels like we need an intermission kind of long.
Yeah, but it's not even that long. It's like 2 hours, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
All told, but I would take out maybe 20 minutes of it.
Especially from that first act.
Or maybe just tell it as a non-musical. Pull an Irma Ladouce. Cut the score.
That's true. Yeah. So a few other things I wanted to just mention. I just liked her line delivery when we're on the Titanic and they've escaped. I just like this sort of gusto of her line here where she's like, "Sit down, you're rocking the boat. Keep quiet." Very funny to me.
It's campy.
Yes, I love that. You know, entertaining the people on the boat, saying she's unsinkable and whatnot. Yeah, but it's like a 3-minute sequence, so it's like, okay, well, we're done with that. And then
it's like, oh, she's a hero.
She returns home. She's finally accepted. All it took was her helping save people in the deadliest shipwreck in human history to get people to accept her. So there you go. But all she really cares about, you know, is getting back together with her husband. It's a nice happy ending. The end. There's not really much to really think about by the end,
no,
unfortunately.
Not really.
Because it's like, this is such a fascinating woman, and look at where she was, look at what she became, and it's just like, yeah, okay. I just like, I don't know if I would even want to learn that more about this person. If this is what I thought her actual life was, I'd be like, oh, okay, that was the story, the end. I want a little more, I don't know, nuance.
Substance?
Because there actually was substance in real life.
She ran for Senate.
Yeah.
Like, there were so many facets of her life, and she never actually reconciled with JJ. They remained friendly, but they lived separate lives.
Yeah.
And they're buried together on Long Island.
Okay.
I was surprised to see that because everyone associates them with Denver,
Yeah.
but it's like they
Hmm.
had lives outside of that as well. And
Yeah.
she was very busy doing other things, and she had her interests, and really a progressive icon.
Yeah.
And that's someone,
And
hey, HBO or someone,
yeah,
give us a limited series.
definitely. I would be very interested in the real story of Molly Brown.
Margaret Brown.
Margaret Brown. Yes, excuse me. So sorry. Yes, I think it's time to move on unless you had any other parting words for Debbie Reynolds.
No, I love you, Debbie,
We
but
love
no.
you, Debbie. All right. Well, our final losing nominee here is Kim Stanley in Seance on a Wet Afternoon. So, this is a pretty unique one here, I think, in the sense that Kim Stanley was not a prolific film actress, but she was much more active in theater and on television. She's another actress who hails from the Actors Studio. She appeared in several stage shows like The Chase, Picnic, Bus Stop, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, A Far Country. She got Tony nomination. She starred in a lot of TV shows and, Playhouse 90, things like that. And she had only done 2 films before Seance, which were The Goddess in 1958, and then she was the narrator of To Kill a Mockingbird, although she was uncredited for that. But for this film, this is another case of the director wanting another star. They wanted Deborah Carr or they wanted Simone Signoret, both of which do make sense for the part, I would say, but they both turned it down. So they went to Kim Stanley, who really wasn't a name, but had certainly put in the work. But the film is about a 40-something woman, Myra, played by Kim Stanley, who works as a medium. She conducts seances. She's married to Billy, played by Richard Attenborough, and she's still recovering from the trauma of losing their only son. But she decides that in order to really make a name for herself and to sort of prove her credibility in her work, she should have her husband kidnap the daughter of this local family so that she can then provide the police with information on how to find her, question mark, using her abilities, quote unquote. And along the way, they try to avoid suspicion as she just kind of slips further and further into kind of madness. So let's talk Seance on a Wet Afternoon and Kim Stanley. I'm wondering if you have major thoughts just on Kim Stanley overall and what your take is on this performance.
Kim Stanley is an interesting character because, again, her film output is very little, but she was an icon of the stage and of the Actors Studio. I think some people called her the female Brando because she was really an intense actress, and it shows in this performance. Like,
Yeah.
it's probably the most actressy performance of the 5 nominees.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what struck me when I started this movie. I was like, it's British. Like, for some reason, I had seen a scene from The Goddess, and I somehow conflated that in my head that it was a Southern Gothic drama
it
I was
sounds
watching.
like it. It's like a seance on a wet afternoon, that sort of
Exactly,
thing.
exactly. But I really only knew her from seeing The Right Stuff and the To Kill Mockingbird voiceover. I mean,
Yeah.
she had a lot of demons. I believe alcohol was a major player. She could be very difficult to work with. And I mean, Katharine Hepburn had her fired from the film version of A Delicate Balance because she was driving Hepburn nuts. And they replaced her with Kate Reid. So there's a lot of talent, but a lot of neuroses there. And it actually works to the benefit of this film that they got her. You sort of forgive whatever she's doing accent-wise because she's really compelling. And it's also, she's anchored by Richard Attenborough, who is truly tremendous in the part of the husband.
Yeah. This is another one that I hadn't seen before, but it's one that I definitely heard raves about from those who have seen it. Seen a lot of praise for her performance. I knew pretty much nothing about Kim Stanley before this, to be honest. I still haven't even seen Frances, which is her supporting actress nomination she got. She only ever did 6 feature films anyway. But yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird is the only one I'd seen, and she's not even on screen for it. So this was like one of those situations that I actually love when I don't have any preconceived notions about an actor heading into their movie, and I'm just sort of along for the ride and seeing where they take me. And this is quite a ride, let me tell you. um, a very, a very engrossing film, very engrossing performance, and very haunting. You know, she has this way of really sort of drawing you in. I find I found myself really leaning in to really sort of take in what she was giving, because it's like she doesn't really announce herself in a very obvious performance kind of way. There's like this kind of gradual simmering where you're getting to know this person who is obviously not well. She is mentally unsound. There's some part of her that's sort of snapped, even if she doesn't really recognize it herself. We see in the beginning how she has this way of just totally dominating the conversation to the point that her husband can't do much but to just like agree with her. You know, she's so convinced of what she feels is true, which is that she has these abilities, but she needs to sort of take it to the next level and do something that any sane person would call reckless and criminal and unhinged, but she doesn't play it like she knows that she's in the wrong. And I love that there's no kind of wink to the camera element to it, of her like trying to either like ham it up or act like she's maybe even above this character. She's just in it, and she has this kind of, I don't know, like this soft sort of hypnotic way of speaking that I find myself kind of drawn in. Even if what she's saying is sort of nonsense, I still am like listening intently to figure out what exactly is the story here. So that for me it's what made this kind of a really interesting discovery, because again, I had no feelings on Kim Stanley heading into this. I vaguely knew about her just from researching, but there's like this really quiet intensity that you can really tell that she was from the actor's studio, but that she really committed to having this character just be in her bones. She's not playing this character, she just is this person. That's how I felt watching it.
I believe they filmed they made the film in sequence. I think they so she could like organically build and go with it.
Yeah,
which is one of the reasons she didn't really like doing films, but it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And what's interesting is that they don't telegraph what's going on. So you're sort of sitting there going like, what are these two up to? And then about 20 minutes in, you're like, what? I think I said it out loud. I was like, what? When they unveiled the plot, I was like, oh no, don't do this. No, bad. This is not going to end well.
Especially when he's so, accepting of this. Ultimately, there's not much.
He loves her so much. It's well, the way I said it was like George and Martha from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf would look at these two and be like, Jesus H. Christ, calm down.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of trauma from the loss of that child that just gets manifested in very erratic and strange behavior. And I can't believe that the husband goes along with it as much as he does.
Yeah.
Because he cannot work because he's got asthma. And so she's the main source of income. They live in the inherited house, which is the only source of their distress or whatever. It's the only thing they quarrel about somehow. I don't know. We don't really find out exactly why that's the case. But it was, as soon as I found out what they were doing, I was riveted, but like the way you would like a slow motion train wreck.
Yeah, it's not going to be pretty. Yeah.
It's not going to end well.
Yeah. I love this line she says towards the beginning of that really is sort of showing how she's justifying this, where she says, Arthur, which is her son who died in childbirth, Arthur wants me to be recognized for what I am. She just has this way of sort of justifying her actions to pull off this wild scheme, saying it's because Arthur is calling her to do this to make her legitimate. And it's a very uncomfortable, this is another uncomfortable watch, I think, much like the Pumpkin Eater, where you can see where, at least here, I think you see where the source of sort of the trauma is, in terms of these two have never fully gotten over the loss of their son, who was their only child. At least that's what's implied. Yeah. And like, you understand how they got to this point, but it's like this feeling. I felt the same way of like Come Back Little Sheba almost,
Mm-hmm.
of like this middle-aged couple who were happy once maybe, but now something's happened that's really caused something to snap, and it's like before they knew it, they're justifying the idea of kidnapping, you know?
Yeah, and just the minute you hear that plan, I'm like, this is going to go horribly wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it does. And she's the mastermind, and she's so calm about it too. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
She's like, well, we're just borrowing her. That mindset. Like, no, you're kidnapping a
Yeah.
lovely little girl. You're gaslighting her to think she's in the hospital, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not wearing a mask over your nose, which is how a pandemic era thing that I would never have thought of
I
before.
know, right?
It's I was like, put that mask up, Kim Stanley.
Some things never change, you know? So the whole scene of her going to sort of plant some seeds by meeting with this girl's parents is another interesting one, where I personally felt like a terrible person because for all intents and purposes, like I should not be rooting for this woman. I should be feeling bad when the mother starts to believe in her because of
It's
just like the specificity she's providing. But
oh
there's
yeah.
something very fascinating I find about this sort of unassuming woman, you know, and the way Kim Stanley sort of carries herself and how she's able to really convince this mother of her gift as a medium, quote unquote.
Hmm.
And it's almost startling to see her going about this with such like an even tone, where it's like I'm not really rooting for her, but I'm sort of so eager to see her try to pull this off in a way that I'm like morbidly curious if she can do it, you know?
You're suddenly like, go on.
Yeah, like I like where you're going with this. Let's see where this is going. This is probably a bad comparison, but for me, not in that respect, but just like the very even tone of it that makes it chilling is sort of like Meryl Streep in Devil Wears Prada, kind of, where the fact that she seems so even keeled despite being like the antagonist, quote unquote.
Hmm.
You know, she's not evil seeming on the surface. She's not playing it evil. She's just sort of playing the truth of what this woman is sort of thinking. So,
Hmm.
I don't know. That for me is a very tricky thing to pull off as an actor, to be able to make me curious to see if you can pull this off, even though in any other circumstance, I would not be wanting this person to be pulling this off. So it's very strange.
It's unusual. I was sort of sitting there like watching through my fingers from time to
Yeah.
time because
Mm-hmm.
Kim Stanley, like, she's unafraid to go there with the character, but it's remarkably uncomfortable to watch,
Mm-hmm.
especially as things start to go wrong.
Yes. And it starts to snowball. Yeah.
And things really go wrong. And then it was so interesting to me, the irony that the pretext they give to this girl that they've transformed a room in their child's room in their house into a hospital room
Mm-hmm.
with no outdoor light. They've like really thought this through, and they have her in there under the pretext that she's ill, and then she actually gets ill.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh God, it was. And you're watching Attenborough really struggle with this throughout the whole movie.
Yes.
And he really does. He really
Mm-hmm.
has a moment, but she gets the showcase moments. This
Mm-hmm.
particularly the two seances that happen towards the end of the film.
Oh
Though
my God.
particularly you're sitting there watching the seance where the girl's mother comes to their house and is in the room next to the girl, and the girl is starting to wake up and ask for her mom.
I know.
And I'm white knuckling it.
Ugh.
The way it builds the suspense is really masterful.
Yeah, really good cross cutting there too.
Oh, and
Um,
you're like, is she hearing it? What's happening? And the
right. Yeah,
poor mother is just distraught.
I know. Yeah,
And
she's
then
just trying to believe in this woman, you know.
then Kim Stanley faints. But that's where
Hmm.
starts to get weird because it's like, what's happening inside of her?
Yeah, and she's saying the word die.
And she,
um,
yeah, it's and that's when she's like, oh, Arthur wants her to join him, and you're like, whoa,
oh God.
like the way she posits that to her husband,
Yeah.
and that's the thing he can't do.
Yeah, that's the breaking point, which is fair. And I'm like,
Obvious.
finally.
It's like, okay, we've gone too far.
Yes. Um,
Well, maybe a little too far.
yeah. Perhaps we're losing the plot. But I think there's kind of a fine line here with those seance scenes, especially where you don't know what she believes and what she's sort of exaggerating or making up. I feel like
Hmm.
there's something very deliberately vague about exactly what is happening with her.
Yes. Well,
And
watching it, I was, I went into it thinking, okay, she's probably a phony medium, and this
mhm,
is the whole thing. But by the time we got, particularly that last seance, that
yeah,
climactic final seance, where she reveals everything, spoiler alert,
yeah,
to the police, I wasn't so sure because
right,
there's
exactly.
there's that weird almost sound of voices that's in the sound mix. Did you notice that?
Yeah,
Where
oh
it's
yeah,
like, what is it? Like, is she hearing that? What's going on? What's really going inside this woman's head?
yeah.
That's where I was like, okay, all
Hmm.
right, you're
Or is she just so kind of detached from reality that she
yeah,
thinks that she's hearing that?
it's sort of like the end of the innocence, like
Yeah,
how much really happened, how much was in the person's head,
yeah,
and she
and
does it very well. It's again,
yeah,
it's and I could see why I feel like she's the nominee who got Hepburn's slot
possibly, yeah,
because
yeah,
I could see the actors, rallying around a performance like this
mm-hmm, yeah,
just because it is rare. Her film appearances are so rare, and it's so unsettling, and it's so unusual. And I mean, she's a controversial figure, I guess, as a performer because she was a very extreme actress. But you could see why this performance would break through like that for a film that wasn't really all that seen in
right,
1964.
yeah, especially
Like
compared
we're
to these
essentially
others.
dealing like The Pumpkin Eater and Seance are kind of like indies that broke through.
Yeah,
Like there was
definitely,
like not really big box office showings and not really. I mean, the Oscar nomination probably was some of the biggest press that these films got.
definitely, yeah, oh yeah, and this definitely strikes me as like that classic passion vote from
Hmm.
actors where it's like you got to see this. I know, she's not a big name, but you got to see what she does here. It's really
Hmm.
extraordinary.
And that's
um
what I would say to everyone listening to your podcast right now.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you should go watch this movie.
mm-hmm,
Um, it if you can find it. I found it on the Criterion Channel.
yeah, right now it's on Criteria and it's also on HBO Max for the time being. Who knows if that's even going to be the case by the time this is released, but
Yeah.
HBO Max.
Yep.
um
Yep. Yep. Yep.
but yeah, it's really, really something. And it's kind of one of the films here that's definitely stayed with me, having
Hmm.
watched it. Really kind of settled with me in an interesting way. But yeah, the whole thing of her sort of like becoming convinced that Arthur is telling her to kill this girl so they can be together, which causes them to, finally snap, like I said. Her finally admitting that, the girl makes her feel so much closer to him, her son, is that's where the kind of heartbreaking element comes in. And it's this kind of like release here for her, which is really cathartic for the both of them, that the real reason behind all of this is that having her around, it's like having their son in a sense again.
Hmm.
But then just by the end, that final seance I think is extraordinary. Also, the scene
It's
before that where she says now she's safe with Arthur is, ugh, that's
it's really
really,
like, ooh,
yeah, almost
like
queasy.
it's really it's unsettling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that last seance just
Mm,
it's just one of those tour de force scenes
it
where
is.
just like an actor gets to really show what they can do. And it's fascinating because it's a very you realize like, oh, they are like afterward you already know like, oh, they've found her, they know what happened, they're just
Yeah.
trying to, but that they did it as a seance with her.
Mm,
Well, when they first showed up and the guy's like, well, I'm also a believer in love, I was like, are you
yeah.
Mr. Policeman? I was like, all right, let's see where this is
Mm,
going.
right.
But about halfway through I realized like, oh, they already know this, they already
Yeah.
know they know the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
But she gets to have that. It's almost like an operatic moment
It is. Yeah, that's what it feels like.
where
Mm-hmm.
she's just everything is just it comes pouring out of her, and it just it blew my mind.
Yeah. I got to the end of the film and I literally rewound it to watch it again because I was just so taken. I felt like there was so much going on in that final sequence. I didn't want to like miss any details.
Hmm.
The emotional journey, the sort of trust that these other people have, and just letting her speak her piece, even if it means just like full on confessing to everything.
Yeah.
It's really, really
It's like,
beautiful.
well, I think those police officers realize they're dealing with a particularly special mental case here. Like
Yes,
there's
they have
there's
to tread lightly.
obviously,
Yeah,
yeah, it could go horribly wrong or something if they don't.
yeah.
So, but wow. And again,
Hmm.
Attenborough, who he got the BAFTA for this, correct?
Yeah, did not get Oscar for it, but I think he
Yeah,
should.
he was definitely worthy.
Yeah,
It's
it's a
not a
great two
supporting
hater.
performance.
No,
It's
I don't think so.
really it's a co-lead,
Yeah,
and he does some extraordinary. Hers is a showier role. His is maybe more fascinating
it is.
because
Yeah,
he's the moral compass who goes along with this.
yeah,
Like what is going on with him? And just the two bouncing off of each other. It's really, and all the complexities of, again, what marriage is.
yeah.
We're doing
This is
we're
another
this is
marriage is complicated thing,
our fourth marriage is complicated in a row movie.
right? My
Even
goodness.
Molly Brown.
Yeah, oh yeah. And you could say that a little bit of that comes into play here with Mary Poppins, not necessarily with Mary Poppins being married to anyone, but yeah, there is definitely a theme going on here. We're unpacking a lot.
Oh yes.
Okay, shall we get to our winner?
Yes, let's.
Much to talk about. I don't want to be here all day, but there is so much to talk about with this one. All
There's a
right.
lot going on here.
Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins. Heard of it? Okay, so iconic Julie Andrews here. She's really received for me this status at this point in modern times of like a Betty White in terms of just like national treasure, been around for so long, just like inherently good, but also like a kind of naughtiness at times, like a hint of that gives her like a nice edge at the same time, which I think is also kind of present in this performance too. There's a long story, of course, of how she got this role. She was a celebrated star in the theater world. She had done TV productions similar to Kim Stanley in that sense, but even more prominent, more beloved. She'd done The Boyfriend, she'd done My Fair Lady, Camelot, and all three of those receiving praise for. But truly, something that continues to blow my mind to this day is the fact that Mary Poppins is Julie Andrews' debut feature film. It's truly, I cannot wrap my head around that. But Julie, of course, was originally hoping to play Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady, but Jack Warner, as we mentioned, felt that she didn't have the proper name recognition to really draw people to theaters, so cast Audrey Hepburn. Julie was disappointed. Walt Disney had seen Julie when she was performing in Camelot and offered her that role of Mary Poppins, and the rest is history here. So let's get right to it. Adaptation of the P.L. Travers novel tells the story of the Banks family who live in London, and the kids sort of struggle to behave with these various nannies that they have until one day a blustery wind comes through, and here comes Mary Poppins descending from the sky in an umbrella like an angel coming to save the day, and she becomes the Banks children's new nanny and shows them all kinds of magical stuff, teaches them the value of a clean room and whatnot, and having good manners and all that lovely stuff, and also introduce them to Bert the chimney sweep, who seems to have some kind of history with her that's sort of hinted at. So let's talk about it. Julie Andrews, Dame Julie Andrews, our winner here. Would love to know your overall thoughts on the legendary Julie Andrews and her an Oscar-winning performance here.
Well, I guess I should say that Mary Poppins is my earliest movie memory from when I was a toddler.
Yeah.
We had it taped from TV, probably an ABC broadcast on a Sunday night. We had commercials and everything on the tape, and I would watch it and I would rewatch it. And my mother would sit me down in front of that. And then every Easter, The Sound of Music was on, and that's my father's favorite movie. So that was always on. And as a toddler, I'm like, what happened to Mary Poppins' brown hair? Then I realized, oh, it's the same person. So I grew up in tandem with both Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. So
Wow.
Julie Andrews is a fundamental aspect of my life and perhaps my entire persona, because she is the gateway to everything that has followed in my life ever since.
You have made
Because
Julie Andrews your entire personality.
pretty much loving her is not a choice, it's who I am.
There you go.
Um, so and it's interesting because I was thinking about this. It's a movie I watched a lot as a child growing up and up and up, and then I didn't see it for a while, then I saw it again older, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, this is really witty and interesting and funny and spectacular. And it did dawn on me while I was doing all the watching for this that it's got to be the Academy Award winning performance I've seen the most times, just
Yep.
based on that. And then I did wonder, like, its ubiquity in so many childhoods across the world, like, it's got to be one of the most watched Oscar winning performances ever,
Oh yeah,
because it's for
easily.
a family film, which is not typical. Look
No.
at where we went with the other nominees.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into the My Fair Lady stuff yet, just based on Mary Poppins alone.
Yeah.
She comes on that screen and it's electric. It's like a movie star is being born, like Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday.
Oh yeah.
She is just so wonderful to watch. She's so charming and witty, and she's not at all what P.L. Travers wrote, which I'm sure Travers notably had a lot of issues with this film adaptation. But the casting of Andrews, she did not. She told her she had the nose for it. But Mary Poppins, as written in the books, I don't know if you've ever read the P.L. Travers books.
I actually haven't.
She is older, she's
Mm-hmm.
more vain, and she
Yeah.
constantly sniffs disapproval. And she's kind of a pagan.
Sure.
It's it's a different vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And there are four Banks children in the books. They drop the twins, John and Barbara. And Mary Poppins comes and goes. There's like a series of stories. She comes, she fixes their lives through these lessons of magic and whatnot, and then she leaves again when the wind changes, and then she comes back because they're in trouble again. And I mean, the idea. I mean, they were thinking when they were. I mean, Walt Disney tried to get this movie made for years and years, and some of the names that come up, it's like Betty Davis, character actresses,
Yes.
Angela Lansbury, character actresses to play a somewhat older, less glamorous version, I would say, because Julie Andrews is very beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
and she's a very beautiful Mary Poppins. And people sort of had this idea that she's nice and she's softer in the film than in the books, but she's kind of mean.
Yeah.
And she gaslights those kids every day. Like, I love the magical thing we did, Mary Poppins. She's like, what on earth are you talking about?
What on earth are you talking about?
And
Yes.
it's every day that happens.
I
And
know.
the more they do things, the more the kids become devoted to her.
Yeah.
And Julie, working in live theater since she was a child and Broadway, and she did 2 years of My Fair Lady in New York and a year and a half of it in London, then Camelot, to say nothing of her live, Cinderella on TV live.
Yep.
Like all of that stuff, all of that performance comes to her. I mean, it's hard to think of someone tasked with carrying a movie on their first go and having it work as well as this. Like 29, film debut, and it's not like other theater actors, maybe they get like a supporting part with a bigger star.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Jack Warner's like, you
Right.
are not a movie star, and Walt Disney's like, I think you can be a movie star. And
And
Walt
he's right.
Disney was the one who won the gamble on that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she made buckets of money for Disney, and that's not just from the movie, it's all of the merchandising, and
Oh my God. Yeah.
all of that comes into play when it comes to Mary Poppins, because it isn't just a movie, it is an extension of the Disney franchising.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of publicity and tie-ins and all sorts of stuff. And then on top of it, the reviews were extraordinary.
So
She got
everything went
rave
right.
reviews, and everyone wanted to see it. I mean, it was the
Right.
highest grossing film of 1964.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. I was wondering if I could step back because it is so close to me and my
Yeah.
life,
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried this time. I rewatched it. I'm like, just don't think of her as Julie Andrews, the legend, the beloved icon. Just try to think of yourself as someone who doesn't really know who she is.
Yeah. In the moment in
Watching in
1964. Right.
1964, And the minute she walks into that house, she is in total command. She films beautifully. The camera loves her.
Yep.
She's witty and sparkling. And what I realized is that she's brusque and she's abrupt and clipped with all of these people on screen in the household. But we, the audience at home, see the twinkle in the eye because there's constant moments where they're off camera and you could sort of see a smirk or there's just
Hmm.
something going on inside and it's very internalized. But we see that there's just so much to this magical person. And it's just an enchanting performance from beginning to end.
Yeah, it's a great word for it. This is truly one of those rare performances that is so iconic and I think noteworthy beyond the fact of her winning an Oscar for it.
Hmm.
And perhaps one of the only cases of that in Best Actress history. I think it's rare to really think about most of the other performances that I've talked about or even will talk about and not have the fact that they won an Oscar for it or were nominated for an Oscar for it be one of the more interesting things about it. You know, I think, like Sigourney Weaver in Aliens is another example of that. Maybe something like Sissy Spacek and Carrie, that sort of thing, where it's just an iconic character that it's sort of permeated beyond the Oscar discussion.
Yeah,
So,
it's
yeah,
bigger than whatever Oscar is.
right. Exactly. And I think it's for that reason that I'm excited to talk about this performance because it's certainly a great role, but it's not one that's necessarily calling to be recognized in that way. I also don't know if you could look at this performance and point to one thing as the obvious scene that got her the Oscar. Maybe it's the ending. We'll talk about it, but I think there's just so much precision in what she does here. The whole motto of Mary Poppins being practically perfect in every way is very much reflected in like the performance itself. Like she just immediately arrives and she is Mary Poppins. It never feels like Julie Andrews is playing Mary Poppins, which I would imagine, yeah, like is how moviegoers in 1964 probably felt too. Maybe they'd seen her on TV, maybe they'd seen Cinderella or something, but in terms of a big screen introduction, she doesn't have the burden of people having an idea in their minds about her going into it like another actress might have. Like maybe people felt with Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, even. Who knows?
Hmm.
Um, the only one who would have some baggage, as you kind of said, is P.L. Travers because she created the thing. But yeah, this is just one of those instant star making performances. There's no insecurity, no hesitance, at least that I can see. Maybe she did feel that. I'm sure she did. But she just makes it look so easy when it's actually, I think, so much more complicated than it appears. Because
Right.
she has to be kind, she has to be firm, she has to be kind of motherly. She's responsible for these children, but she shouldn't be trying to replace their actual mother. So she has to keep a bit of distance, all while being this sort of supernatural figure without much of any backstory to draw on.
Nope. Nope. That's the thing. Like, she's always existed somehow.
Yeah, she's eternal. Yeah. And I think she just makes it all feel very natural and real, even with those kind of supernatural barriers, that it's kind of like a miracle of a performance. What's interesting, though, is on this watch, watching it in the context of performance, kind of like you were saying. I mean, she has by far the least amount of screen time of anyone that we've talked about. She has the
Hmm.
least complex character, arguably.
There's no arc.
Right. At least Debbie Reynolds has something of an arc in her film. With this, she's mostly the same at the beginning as she is at the end. Maybe she's a little sad to be leaving this family, but I don't know if this experience like changed her fundamentally. And I almost find it hard to even compare this to the other performances in the sense that like it's not an acting showcase per se. For some reason the idea of seeing this is like better or worse than the other performances here. I'm sort of struggling with it. Maybe over the
It's
course of this
hard.
discussion I'll come to some sort of conclusion about how I sort of feel about it.
Well, her presence in the category is sort of that apples and oranges and bananas and you so many different things
Yeah.
and her presence there, if it weren't, I mean, it comes down to the My Fair Lady thing too as well. But I also feel that If My Fair Lady hadn't come out that same year, she still would have been nominated. She still would have she still would have had this breakthrough moment with this wonderful
Right.
musical, this popular musical. Audiences fell in love with this person for the charm. Maybe that's what it is. It's the charm of Julie Andrews.
Yeah.
Because she is extremely charming on screen. She's warm, she's relatable, even when she's being kind of chilly to the kids. You
Yeah.
could tell that, like, when she's keeping that distance, there's still something that the audiences watching at home latch onto.
Yes.
And she's not, like I said, there's no arc, but she's sort of like the opposite of a chaos agent. Like,
Yeah.
she's there to like fix all of the chaos.
She's like this stabilizing force.
She comes into this life because it is, again, you're dealing with a family in crisis. You have absentee parents. You have a father who's just focused on his work, a mother who's off being a suffragette, and the kids are, story often told, kids are acting out for attention. And the same thing would happen in The Sound of Music a year later.
Yeah.
But you have her there, stabilizing is a great word for it, and delivering these life lessons to these kids, but in a way that is not didactic. It's fun, it's amusing, and it's a series of vignettes. You go on these adventures with these people when they jump into a chalk painting. All of a sudden we're at the carnival, or at the races, or we're on the ceiling and having a tea party. There's just something so delicious about all of that. And the way that she sort of acts like it's just everyday activity.
Yes.
But then, like, what I love, like, again, getting back to the gaslighting, like, they're like, a tea party in the ceiling, and she's like, really? Or they're like, this is a woman who sings an ironic lullaby. The kids are like, I'm too tired to sleep, so she sings Stay Awake.
Yeah.
And then they fall asleep.
Her mind. Yes.
Truly. And that's another thing. The score is really good too.
It's beautiful.
I mean, there are, like, Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious is a banger.
It is a bop. Yes. And I also think her vocal ability is like unmatched here in terms of exactly not only like a great vocal performance, but exactly what the character of Mary Poppins would sound like. Because
it's true.
There's precision in it. Like the actual elocution of it is so pitch perfect and on point, just like that. And it's like, here are your lessons. Spoonful of sugar. Like, very much like, here are the things that you need in life.
And the interesting thing for her was, being her first movie, she didn't know anything about filmmaking. Essentially, she learned, like, when she signed on, that she was going to have to pre-record the vocals, which is the opposite of what you do when you make a theater role. You record the album after you've done rehearsals and you're performing the show and you've got it into your bones. She's like, I didn't quite know. She's like, I had to guess. And she said that everyone on the film was very accommodating for her as a novice, but that a lot of it was her just using instinct, because she never trained as an actress. She just worked. So it's almost like Doris Day popping out, just like being honest and fully herself on screen. And that sort of relatability really, it's what made her an icon. That 1-2 punch of Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. It was like this supernova movie star moment.
Yeah.
And the rest of her film career doesn't quite live up to that.
Yeah, I mean, because it's an impossible height to sort of try to reach again.
That kind of 1-2 punch is almost unheard of.
Right. And I understand that, yeah, she did sort of struggle to at least either sort of branch out from that and have people see her in a different light, or try to recapture that with other musicals, and it just didn't feel like the same. I get where the struggle came from in the end. But yes, I mean, I also wanted to talk about the relationship with Bert, which I think is a fun through line. They have such an easy chemistry together, and I think he's the one who's really selling the idea of her being like this legendary figure. And she's like, oh, being very modest about it, but also admitting like, yeah, I am that shit. They have some really nice sort of flirting that obviously isn't much more than that, but there's kind of just like this nice warmth to their scenes.
There's like a hint that there could be something there.
Yeah, but it feels like it's good that it's just sort of like respectfully, it's just sparring. Yeah. And I feel like, I don't know, in terms of the characterization of Mary, how she's presented, I find the way that she's written is obviously deliberate in being mysterious. You don't know exactly what she is, you don't know her history, but the way she presents it, it's like you don't really need that. And I think it's ironic, obviously, to say that a movie with the title Mary Poppins isn't actually about Mary Poppins. She obviously has a huge effect on like the course of events in the film, but there's just this kind of warmth and charisma in how she presents the character that you don't need to know who she is or what she is. You know, her
You just
role
sort
in
of
the narrative.
accept her. You accept her
Yeah.
at face value. Like, okay.
Yeah. She's here to help this family and
Like,
to
well, her entrance. I mean, we see her in the opening credits sitting in a cloud,
yeah.
but like she means business. She literally blows like 30 nannies away.
Yeah.
Wind
Never
sweeps
to be
them
seen
off
again.
to never to be seen again. And then she flies in.
Yeah.
And that is a remarkable entrance for a character.
It is.
Like, it is. How could she not become a star after that?
She swooped in and stole the Oscar from all these other ladies.
Yes.
Just like, here I am. Yes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like if she gave us more, you know, to make her more humanized, or to like mug for the camera, or to go in the opposite direction and be too strict with it, I don't think it would work for the story. So as much as it's tough for her to like find opportunities to create a fully three-dimensional character with it, I can't really fault her for it, because like to do any more or any less with it, I think would be a detriment to the film itself, because again, it's not about her. And if she was too strict, I feel like you would be like not as
maybe a little
sort
more
of
turned off.
Yeah. And
It's
so
like Seance on a wet afternoon's next door, thank you.
Right. Yeah. Imagining now Kim Stanley in this role.
It would be acted.
It would. It certainly would.
Lots of choices.
Yes. I mean, in terms of the technical elements too, I think it's kind of remarkable that, again, this is being her first film, having to also work against green screen and like interacting with these animals who are entirely animated. The whole supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, like working with nothing really beyond that. It's just like, again, like the technical element of it too is kind of impressive, and she just gets to do some choreography and the step in time number. Like there's more of a physicality to it than I remember, I guess, in terms of like being an impressive performance.
We're gonna keep coming back to My Fair Lady, but it's like, oh yeah, this is what she was trained to do. This is like musical comedy heaven. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that some of the affection for the performance in the time was like, why wasn't she good enough to do My Fair Lady on film? Like, she's perfect in this.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's where a lot of the sentiment pro Andrews comes from when it comes to this category.
Agreed.
Not that it's not that it's a, you know, the consolation prize that Andrews came to think of it as. Like she didn't display that Oscar for a long time because she felt it was, you know, just like, we're sorry you didn't get My Fair Lady award, you know. Mm-hmm. But it's of its own merit, it's a deserved award.
Exactly. And I think the reason is it's all entirely just media created, ultimately, the whole narrative of it all.
All of it.
So,
I mean, it's catnip for them to be like, well, just the confluence, everything happening the way it did.
Yeah, it's too neat of a story to sort of ignore that part of it.
You change one element of it, you push one movie to 1 year or something, and none of it's not nearly as compelling as what actually played out.
Right. But yeah, it is on merit that she does win, I think. I mean, the close-up of her at the end of looking through the window at the Banks family sort of skipping through the town, and this sort of mix of pride and also a little bit of melancholy over having to leave, knowing her job is done, that sort of, again, like having to interact with like this animatronic thing, this parrot, her umbrella, and still managing to sort of land the emotional beats of that. It's pretty astonishing.
It's a remarkable performance by any standard.
There's a reason why she became like an instant icon status after this, and of course Sound of Music, which comes out in March of 1965, so right in the middle of Oscar voting.
I think it was like a few days before, or so. It's like really right in there. It all That's got to be wild too, because
Mm-hmm.
she's someone who is kind of known,
Mm-hmm.
but the fame that those two movies give you in so short a time, it's just like I had to rock her solar plexus.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're the biggest movie star in the world.
How do you adjust to that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should get into the Oscar portion of it all, because there's again a lot to get to. Don't want to be here all day, but we got to talk about it. Audrey, of course, was snubbed. That was the big story of the day, and the fact that there was the dichotomy of Julie Andrews here. When I would imagine there was some thought that it was going to be a horse race between the two of them for the Oscar, and then one of them doesn't even
Right.
make it. It's like, oh boy, this is really interesting. Yeah. And really, for her, it's like she had so much in her favor. She wasn't just the big movie star. She won a Golden Globe. She was a nominee of the New York Film Critics, which is like, this isn't really a performance that naturally seems like it would be a critic's favorite necessarily. Winning a BAFTA for Most Promising Newcomer. In terms of other precursors that the other women had, Anne Bancroft did very well for herself. As we were saying earlier, she won BAFTA, she won Golden Globe, she won at Cannes, so she had a lot of hardware going into it. Sophia Loren and Debbie Reynolds were both Golden Globe nominees, didn't win anything, but Kim Stanley won New York Film Critics, she won National Board of Review, she was a BAFTA nominee. This is like, again, like that classic passion pick that we see sometimes of like there's some like something might happen in the best actress race. There's some movement, and then this one passion pick gets in. I think that's a classic case of that for Kim Stanley. But let's get right into it. Why do we ultimately think Julie Andrews was our big winner here?
I think it's the star-making performance in a really well-crafted movie musical that is a pleasure to watch. It's lovely to look at, and she rises to the occasion of the breakout star with such aplomb that in any circumstance you would watch that movie and you go, wow. And also she was and this is something I noticed as well. She's the only nominee in this category who is in a Best Picture nominee.
Yeah.
And I know that often tends to help.
Usually helps. Yeah.
Yeah. So she had a bit of a push from that. Poppins and My Fair Lady were essentially the horse race.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen in Best Actress, but in all the other races, I mean, you have My Fair Lady taking 8 Oscars and Mary Poppins taking 5. That's a big night for Edwardian musicals at the Academy Awards.
Yeah, so if you love an Edwardian musical, you're having a great
This
night.
was your year.
Yes.
She's young, she's enterprising, she's popular. There's just so much about Julie Andrews that works in favor for this kind of win, I think. And again, the most seen of the nominations as well.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Like bigger than like a lot of like Unsinkable Molly Brown was a hit, but not the blockbuster that Mary Poppins ended up being.
Yeah.
And several of them, it's you have Sophia Loren and Kim, who were not at the Oscars that year either.
No.
They didn't attend. I imagine they were feeling just happy to be there. Mm-hmm. I feel like Debbie probably felt she had a shot.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if anyone, I know this is where we're heading, but if anyone were to have won it otherwise, it would have been Anne Bancroft. That's my feeling.
Hmm.
That's who I feel is the other one who would take it. Just if she hadn't won, especially if she hadn't won for Miracle Worker, I think definitely could have taken. That would have been the race.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of imagine this race and not have to think about the Audrey of it all. And because so much oxygen was put on that I feel like I didn't get a clear sense just from my own research if anyone else besides Julie Andrews was even really in contention here. Like it seemed like such a foregone conclusion by the end that what is the race really? The film had 13 nominations. There was this narrative of her being jilted by My Fair Lady. It's her being the hot new star, the sympathy narrative in the film with the most nominations. Everyone's seen it. There's merchandise. Like literally everything was in her favor. The Sound of Music is out now. It's just, maybe outside of having like a traditionally dramatic kind of performance that usually wins here, like that's the only thing that would lead me in a different direction here of trying to predict this. But yeah, she had everything on her side, and it's so different even from Debbie Reynolds, I think, than
Yeah.
anything else in this category, that no vote splitting situation here. Like it was always going to be her.
Yeah.
And I think probably would have been even if Audrey was nominated, to be
I
honest.
think
I don't
so
know if we
too.
got that question, but yeah.
Because the narrative in the press became, because then Marnie Nixon enters the equation.
Yes.
Audrey Hepburn, and this wasn't fair. They had no intention of ever using Audrey Hepburn's voice. They were going to use Marnie Nixon all along, but they let Audrey work and do voice lessons and record tracks and do all of that with the understanding that she felt she was going to do the singing, and then Marnie Nixon would dub in some of the really difficult high notes. It's a soprano role, and that's not how the film turned out. And Jack Warner really bungled the narrative on that, because
Yeah.
when it got out with Deborah Carr, it wasn't necessarily, I mean, Ingrid Bergman had everything was in her favor, the big comeback and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't prevent Deborah from getting a nomination. Also, Marnie Nixon and Deborah Carr's work is the finest dubbing ever in a film, because
You would never know.
it's an extension of it as opposed to being a dubbing, it's more of an extension of the performance, the way they did it. Mm-hmm. Having Marnie Nixon in rehearsal, and then the two of them in the recording studio together, figuring out who sang, said, did what, even down to like a note here or there or a word here or there. It's a magnificent performance, even with dubbing. It's just spectacular. With My Fair Lady, somehow, and Marnie had dubbed Natalie Wood in West Side Story as well, but somehow when the news got out, it became a detriment to Audrey in the press anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of being like, well, she's getting half a performance. It just sort of started to dominate. So I think that it would have gone to Julie over Audrey if they had both been co-nominated. It would have been a repeat of the Golden Globe face-off. Right. That's my feeling there.
Yeah. So again, it's like I imagine Julie just got the lion's share of votes here. I really don't think it was close.
I don't think so either.
And I did just want to mention, I love her Golden Globe speech. As you may recall, her little bit of shadiness, where she said that the one person who really deserved most thanks here is Mr. Jack Warner.
It's a great, and he thought it was hilarious, but it's a bold thing to say.
It is.
But it also, it sort of really addresses the elephant in the room of the whole award season.
Yes. So
she's like, I'm just going to pop the balloon right here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great line. And I mean, it really is all of his choices.
Yeah.
Apparently, if she had gotten My Fair Lady, Disney was going to hold Poppins for her.
Yeah.
Like, that's how much faith Walt Disney had in Julie Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I want you for this part so bad.
You're the only one. Yeah.
Like, that's a real vote of confidence.
It is.
And Disney, I'm sure he was extremely proud of it. It was his only time up at Best Picture, and such a great Oscar showing, due in most part to Julie Andrews.
Totally.
And all of the great character actresses that were hired for Mary Poppins.
Yes. Glynis Johns, Hermione Baddeley, Elsa Lanchester, Jane Darwell in her last film.
Betty Lou Gerson, the voice of Cruella de Vil, makes a brief cameo as the crone who tries to snatch the kids.
There you go. So, yeah.
Everywhere.
The women who raised us. These great character actresses. Anyway, I think it's time to get to some Twitter questions. This is from Daniel B, who said, is Julie Andrews the best film debut performance of all time?
There's an argument for it. I don't like to speak in superlatives, but if you're going to make a list, she's going to be near the top of it.
Yeah, I might personally have Barbra Streisand and Funny Girl as the best personally, but yeah, top 5. I'd have to look at a full list of film debut performances to say for sure, but yeah. David Pusak said, do you think Julie Andrews is the best singer who has been nominated in this or any acting category?
Again, superlatives. Again, Streisand.
Again, Streisand, yeah.
But if she's not number 1, she's definitely in the top 3.
Mm-hmm.
She's definitely the
Yeah.
best soprano.
There you go. Dark Shaka said, cast Julie Andrews in one of Audrey Hepburn's Oscar-nominated roles.
Oh, that's curious.
Yeah, do a bit of a switcheroo here. I feel like the nun story is maybe too on the nose with like
Yeah.
playing a nun again.
My first thought was Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh, Julie Andrews in Breakfast at Tiffany's. That would
Well, then
be
again,
wild.
like, I mean, Audrey was so wrong for the movie and it didn't matter, but it's just one of those, you just see her in, I could just see it working.
I would
Or
like
even,
that.
maybe even
Sabrina.
Sabrina.
I could see Sabrina. I think she could play the kind of mousiness of that character well.
Yeah.
Mark Lamb said, was Carrie Fisher's jibe at Julie Andrews beating her mom for her, quote, multi-layered performance as Mary Poppins a fair shot?
No, it wasn't, because I know she's biased, but had Carrie Fisher seen The Unsinkable Molly Brown?
Fair
I
question.
remember that. That was from Wishful Drinking, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of was, she knocked Poppins a bit, but I'm like, I don't know that. I mean, she's going for the laugh,
Yeah.
but
I understand
I
where it's coming
disagree.
from.
But
It's
also, she
just,
was there with her mom when she lost the Oscar,
mm-hmm.
so
I
she's
get
going to be
it.
biased.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not mad at it, but
Yeah.
Dark Shaka said, would Audrey be a good choice to play Mary Poppins?
Yes.
It would have been a fun experiment to just swap the roles and see what happens, you know?
I think it would have been interesting. Maybe she's a little too kind,
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know if she
but
has a strictness there.
she might be able to find it. I mean, that's the thing about Audrey Hepburn, is that she's just so lovely, and that
Mm-hmm.
sort of permeated everything.
Yeah. Fritz said, be completely honest with yourself. Without the My Fair Lady controversy, could Julie Andrews have won for such a role?
Yes.
I think so. I mean, Mary Poppins was the highest grossing movie of the year, so yeah, I think she still would have a lot in her favor, even if she didn't have the My Fair Lady stuff. For some Anne Bancroft here, Joe Dimmock said, if Bancroft hadn't won 2 years ago, would she have been able to upset Andrews here? And if so, does Andrews beat Christie next year?
Yes. Speculation is fun, and that would be a speculation there. Like, if she doesn't win for The Miracle Worker, that gives them more impetus to vote for her in '64.
Mm-hmm.
She's well liked.
Yeah.
She gets the Golden Globe and other precursors. Again, as an actress, she's not as extreme as Kim Stanley, but there's something about her ability to take on a role that really enchants the industry. So
Mm-hmm.
I could see her winning for The Pumpkin Eater, and then it would be a no-brainer. Like, well, she did Mary Poppins, now she's in The Sound of Music, which
Right.
some people tell me they feel that she should have won for.
Mm-hmm.
I love to with my Twitter people, I love to play around with those speculations.
Yeah.
But I could easily see that being the case.
Again, I think Mary Poppins was such a phenomenon that I kind of think Julie still would have won, to be honest. I think it would have been a lot closer, the vote,
Mm-hmm.
if Anne Bancroft hadn't won, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing we have to keep reminding ourselves about this category, is that the Hepburn thing is one part of the narrative, but we're talking about a major blockbuster cultural phenomenon.
But if Anne Bancroft did win, then yes, I think Julie Andrews definitely wins for Sound of Music. So, Joey Gentili said in relation to the Pumpkin Eater, where are the goddamn pumpkins? False advertising. Where are the pumpkins?
My brother also, he's like, where are the pumpkins?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, who is the pumpkin eater? I'm like, I'm not discussing this with you. I'm not.
Yeah. For those who don't know, the title is a reference to the nursery rhyme, Peter, Peter, Pumpkin Eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her. I think it's a clever title.
It is.
Couldn't have killed them to have her read it maybe to one of the kids in the film to maybe help clarify.
Well, that would be more clarifying to us, because that's not
Yes.
really a rhyme that has stood the test of time.
No, but Sophia Loren questions, if Loren and Bancroft hadn't previously won, do you think one of them could have managed to prevail over Andrews? If so, which one of them?
I feel like if Andrews is not winning, it's still going to swing to Bancroft.
I think so,
That's
too.
my gut. That's my gut.
Yeah, Bancroft feels like the more winning kind of performance to me there.
Right.
Dark Shaka said, if 1960s Hollywood produced Marriage American Style, who would play the role originated by Loren?
Doris Day.
Oh, I was going to say, like, knowing Hollywood in the early 60s, they'd probably just do Shirley MacLaine.
Maybe. But
You know,
I feel like it wouldn't be as sexy. Like we discussed this earlier, it wouldn't
that's
be
fair.
as,
Yeah.
it would be so sanitized from
Mm-hmm.
what we know it to be. The script would go
Yeah.
through so many iterations, and it would be cheekier
Yeah.
and maybe not as affecting.
Agreed. So I'm glad it didn't happen. Christoph said, at what point watching The Unsinkable Molly Brown did you realize that the Titanic sinking is not going to be the main event of the film? And at what point did you wonder if the Titanic would even show up at all? Great question, Christoph. I mean, like, probably around the hour 50 mark. Like, it's really funny how much of an afterthought that whole sequence is. It just feels so obligatory.
It's almost like just like, yeah, we have to do this.
Get it out of the way.
What you people showed up for.
Yeah.
Here's Debbie Reynolds in a rowboat. Okay, you fine? Let's move on.
Well, let's move on, right? Dark Shaka said this was Reynolds' sole nomination. Did she deserve other Oscar noms? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Starting with Singing in the Rain, I would say, personally.
And I'll throw back Mother again. If you haven't seen Debbie Reynolds in Mother, it's a wonderful performance, and you should seek it out.
Mm-hmm. And Chelsea said, are you unsinkable?
I think I'm unthinkable.
Wow. Very good. I like to think I am, but no, I don't know if anyone is truly unsinkable. This is getting into some philosophical territory here. Moving on. Jeremy Kaplan said, I think Kim Stanley's performance in Seance is one of the most underrated of the decade. Do you think she might have had a chance of winning in a different year? Or was her film too small or the character too unlikable for her to come out on top?
That's a tough one. I'm trying to think of some other year. Well, likability going forward in the 60s is not an issue.
Yeah.
Like 1966, it's Martha and Virginia Woolf.
Right.
Maybe she would have had a shot in 63.
I literally had the same thought. Like, if she competes the previous year, she could have won. Honestly. Yeah. No offense to that lineup, but yeah. Sorry, Patricia Neal.
It's a weak lineup in 63.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fritz has a very funny question. Is this really Kim Stanley and not Geraldine Page?
Actually, now I'm wondering what Geraldine Page would have done with it.
Yeah.
And she would have gone places with it that we couldn't even begin to fathom, and it would have been equally brilliant, I think.
I think so. And maybe she could have contended more for the win, because she's much more well-known.
Well, they loved her.
Oh, yeah. Not enough to give her a win until the 80s, but they did love her.
Yeah.
Chelsea said, Kim Stanley appeared in very few movies. Are there any Oscar-nominated roles, past or present, you could picture her in?
Streetcar.
Oh, my.
We're talking winning roles?
Nominated roles.
Nominated roles? Yeah. There's a lot of things I think she could have done. There was a lot of ability there.
I was going to say almost everything that I've seen with Geraldine Page, I could have seen Kim Stanley do. Especially interiors. I think that would be really interesting.
Hear me out. Kim Stanley in Blue Jasmine.
Wow. Okay. I like it.
Well, she's very good at neurotic characters.
She's very good at that, yeah.
Like, I don't think it would be as interesting, or what if she had hooked up with John Cassavetes?
I think that would have been a very powerful combination.
Yeah.
A woman under the influence.
With Kim's, I mean, that was kind of her in real life.
Well, there you go. Yes, let's see. Fritz said, do you think Audrey was snubbed? So our personal opinion, do we think she was snubbed? And why do you think she was not nominated? Well, we sort of have covered why she wasn't, I would say, the Marnie Nixon of it all. Would you nominate her for this, for My Fair Lady?
Yes. Again, apologies to Debbie. I would take Debbie Reynolds out, and I would swap in Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah.
I think Eliza Doolittle is the more successful musical comedy performance of the two.
I would certainly say so, yes. I would agree. I would not have a problem nominating her. I haven't seen a wide swath of all of the leading actress performances of this year to really say like, oh, she definitely is making my five. But yeah, I would be fine with the nomination for her. James R. Burns said, do you think Audrey Hepburn was the right actress to play Eliza Doolittle in the movie version?
The right actress.
I mean, like, it probably should have been Julie Andrews in terms of like the right actress, but
Well, here's the thing about that. It's like, well, Julie should have done it, yes, but the reality is that Audrey did it and she did it well.
yeah.
And the film was a success on those merits and with her in that part.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what you feel about the dubbing, which isn't, make or break for me when it comes to these kind of performances. She's enchanting.
Yeah.
All of the things about that you love about Audrey Hepburn come to play here. And it is not her fault that Jack Warner sought a movie star to anchor his multi-million-dollar film. And she delivered.
Yeah, she did.
And so I think you take Julie Andrews out of the equation this time, and yes, she was the right actress. Who else are you going to have? Elizabeth Taylor. I think Elizabeth Taylor wanted it.
That tracks.
But
yeah,
who would Shirley MacLaine as Eliza Doolittle? Like,
yeah, keep coming back to her.
Like, I feel like Warner made a business decision, and it paid off for him in the end. It's not as iconic a film as Mary Poppins, but on its own merits, it's quite successful.
Jeffrey Kerr said, had Audrey been nominated for My Fair Lady, who do you think she would have replaced? Probably Kim Stanley. I don't know if we get three musical performances in this category, so I was flirting with maybe Debbie Reynolds there, but probably Kim, right?
Kim, likely, maybe Debbie.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. Andrew Carden said, who is the ultimate Molly Brown, Debbie or Kathy Bates?
Thelma Ritter.
Okay.
Wow. No, she doesn't actually play. It's a character based on Molly Brown. I think her name is Madge or something in the 53 Titanic.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question, though. I'm going to go with Kathy.
I think Kathy, too, honestly.
Yeah.
Sammy Flower said, Kathy Bates clearly knew how to play Molly Brown as well. How do you guys think she would have fared playing the other four nominated roles here? She would have been a fun Mary Poppins.
Should have been terrifying in Seance. That
would be a lot, yeah.
But it would be a much more internalized performance than Kim Stanley.
Yes.
She'd be so placid and then shock you.
I could see her playing the kind of like madness of it really well. Yeah.
Let's put her in Marriage, American Style.
Oh, God. A sort of scheming wife. I could see that. Yeah. Cinema Sex Kitten said, 1964 was the television debut of The Addams Family. Cast two of these women in the roles of Morticia and Wednesday.
Sophia Loren is Morticia.
Correct.
And Debbie Reynolds at the end of the movie? I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know when. That's a harder.
Yeah.
Because
I can't really see anyone
about
playing
Wednesday is deadpan.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I don't quite see it.
I would be interested to see an Anne Bancroft version of Morticia. I think that would be interesting because she can play the comedy, and she could. Yeah, there's a glamour to her. I think she could play. Another one from Cinema Sex Kitten, 1964, was the debut of Funny Girl on Broadway. Which of these women would have played the role best?
Anne Bancroft.
Okay.
Because she was in consideration for the Broadway production.
I don't disagree there. I would say my answer to that is none of them.
Well, Julie Stein started, because they're like, we want a star, and that's a whole other story, but he started writing the score because he wanted Streisand, so he's like, let me write it for her style.
Yeah. Mark Brinkerhoff said, how close was the Globe-nominated Jean Seberg to cracking the lineup? Or was Lilith perhaps her best chance at an Oscar nom, just too weird or avant-garde for the Academy this early in the 60s?
What he said.
Probably, yeah, not too close. I don't think that's their style at the time. No. At least not yet. Not yet. E. Merman's Purse said, is this the weakest field of the decade? Definitely not. We just
Nope.
got done talking about 1963, so, like, you know. And I think that is just about it. Yes. So let's get to our final segment at last, where we will discuss who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Kevin Daly, what is your verdict?
My verdict is Ms. Anne Bancroft. I feel like she had a lot of the precursor awards elsewhere. She is remarkably respected. It's a remarkably good performance. And if anyone out of those four is going to get the second most votes, I think it would have been her.
I don't disagree. However, I would like to present an alternative in this case, which is Debbie Reynolds. Regardless of what we said about the performance itself, I think the Academy was in a lighthearted mood this year, just by looking at the four acting winners, the Best Picture winner. I think if one of Anne Bancroft or Kim Stanley were there, I would say that they would be a higher chance of getting it, but I might wonder if that type of performance could split a little bit. Even though this is also a musical performance, I think Debbie Reynolds did some campaigning.
She did.
Yes, she's a very likable person. They really liked the film. They gave it 5 other nominations. All the others here only had this one nomination in Best Actress. And I also read some behind-the-scenes talk of them possibly wanting to give it to Debbie since they knew Julie Andrews was coming the next year for Sound of Music. So for that reason, I am going to present Debbie Reynolds as the runner-up. But I could very much see Anne Bancroft as a very strong, sort of dramatic, traditional possibility.
I was looking at the New York Times. I was going into the archives and I was reading an article the day before the Oscars. And one of the articles said the ads are always curious with little examples of subdued persuasion. And then it goes on to make fun of Agnes Moorehead. But it is but MGM really did try. They really did. They put so many ads in the trades and whatnot, like about Debbie Reynolds.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna say you're off
plausible.
the beaten path. I just feel like they would have gone with if they're not going to go with they're not going with her, it's not going to be a musical performance. That's just my feeling.
That makes sense. Yeah. I don't think Kim Stanley or Sophia Loren had this one necessarily. So I think it's between those two, I would
That's
guess.
why they didn't show up.
Right. There you go. Okay, well, final question for you, moment of truth. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
I would have ridden the wave all the way with Julie.
And I say that bandwagon.
I would have to be.
Yeah.
Even if and then this is just it's more my emotion than anything else, considering, like I said, all that she means to me. It all factors in. She's tremendous. I love her, and I'm so glad she has an Oscar.
Me too, absolutely. And I'm glad it was for a unique kind of performance that isn't the traditional either biopic or like super depressing, devastating character study necessarily that sometimes we get here. I would have also voted for Julie Andrews. I think it's a miracle of a performance, and I'm glad she got it too. I think, Anne Bancroft is excellent. Sophia Loren is amazing. Kim Stanley is otherworldly. All of those could have competed really well in another year that didn't have this sort of magic X factor in Julie Andrews. So if I was a voter in 1964, I would definitely ride that wave. But even now, I'm still feeling like this is one of those indelible performances in film history. So with that, thank you so much, Kevin, for doing this. This was a really fun trip down 1964. This was fun.
Thank you so much. I had a blast. I could do another 3 hours.
Yes. There's so much to get into with all of these races, and especially this one. And I'm glad you were here to help me break it down and tell people where they could find more of you on the internet.
I am everywhere at Kevin D. Daly, Twitter, Instagram, Hive, Facebook, Letterboxd. I just sort of snatched up my name and just spread it everywhere.
Yes.
And Kevin, it was a real pleasure talking to you.
Yes.
So as glad to have you speak face to face for the first time.
I know. Well, it won't be the last, I think. We'll have you on again.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, shows at Oscar Runner Up, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is. And next week we'll be delving into the 1965 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, Julie Christie in Darling, Samantha Eggar in The Collector, Elizabeth Hartman in A Patch of Blue, and Simone Signoret in Ship of Fools, with the winner being Julie Christie. So that's what to watch before next week. Thanks again, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.